Chapter 9:19. Although Luo Fan didn't know whether to laugh or cry, he was also quite happy about it. Of course, it wasn't because his vanity was satisfied because he was regarded as being on the same level as sage Confucius, but because Bai Mu City's performance showed that what he had done over the past thousands of years had been fruitful. His reputation had long been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, and this meant that the intermediate quasi-saint who created this dream world was about to appear in front of him. With this thought, a faint smile appeared on his face. While they were talking, Bai Mu City Lord had already brought Luo Fan to the front of the huge library hall. Although this library was the largest library in the entire dreamscape, it was no different from the libraries in other cities. It was still empty, and there were no guards guarding it. Everyone could enter and leave at will. Bai Mu City brought Luo Fan to the entrance of the library hall and said, "Senior Human Master must have his own plans, so I won't disturb you any further. Senior Human Master, please do as you please." Luo Fan naturally didn't mind. He smiled and nodded, then walked into the library hall. As soon as he entered the hall, he felt a scholarly aura that was many times stronger than the outside world. This scholarly aura was tens of thousands of times stronger than that of other cities. With a slight sense, Luo Fan knew that this kind of scholarly aura couldn't be produced without a collection of hundreds of millions of books. It's actually on such a large scale. Looks like I'll be able to gain quite a lot this time. After a slight consideration, Luo Fan was indescribably happy. In the past thousands of years, he had visited thousands of cities and visited thousands of library halls. The number of books he had read was at least tens of billions. However, there were no duplicates among these tens of billions of books. There were only 2 or 3 million books. The other tens of billions of books were just copies of one of these 2 or 3 million books. The reason for this was not complicated. For an ordinary city, it was not complicated. For ordinary cities, the books were usually common knowledge and basic knowledge, in addition to some unique characteristics or historical books of the city. Among them, except for some unique knowledge and history of the city, everything else was similar in every city. Naturally, they were all duplicates, but the library hall in front of him wasn't like this. Among the tens of millions of books, there were bound to be duplicates. However, the vast majority of them were not. But most of them were definitely different. Moreover, most of the 2 or 3 million books that Luo Fan had read in the past thousands of years were definitely included, except for some unique books of the city, which wouldn't be leaked to the outside world, or those that had only appeared recently. They might not have been included just now. One could imagine what a pleasant surprise this was for Luo Fan. In his surprise, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He directly picked the nearest library and went in, then began to flip through the books in it. It was just as he had expected. Although he had visited thousands of cities and swept through the books in thousands of cities, just the books in any random library among these tens of thousands of libraries were already books that he had never seen before, books that could enlighten him a lot. When he saw this, Luo Fan suddenly felt slightly regretful in his heart. He had actually wasted thousands of years to come here. If he had come here earlier, perhaps his cultivation would have been countless times stronger than it was now. However, this regret only lasted for a moment. Although compared to the collection of books in front of him, his thousands of years of hard work seemed to have been in vain, he had also achieved the first step of his goal and spread his name. Moreover, this vast collection of books had always been here. Even if it was a few thousand years later, he would still be able to read them, and there would be no irreparable consequences from wasting a few thousand years. After various thoughts flashed through his mind, Luo Fan wholeheartedly immersed himself in the astonishing number of books in front of him. This time, it was impossible for Luo Fan to finish reading the entire collection in a month. Until 3 years later, Luo Fan had only finished reading 1/5 of the entire collection. Although the number of books he had read during this period of time had already reached more than 20 million books. On this day, Luo Fan was reading a book about formations on the 6th floor of the library. Suddenly, he had a thought and his mind was faintly touched. Countless originally disorderly mysteries of the Great Path collapsed and reorganized in his eyes, turning into an unbelievably profound meaning that could not be described with words. As soon as this profound meaning appeared, Luo Fan felt that his realm had broken into an unprecedented realm. He felt that the entire world, the entire universe, and even himself had undergone an earth-shattering change. The saint's decree that had fused with his body instantly left his body and floated above his head, producing a light curtain that enveloped an area of several dozen feet around him. "I've finally broken through." Luo Fan let out a long breath, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. At this moment, such a change was because he had broken through the shackles of his Tao experience and broken through the initial Tao integration minor success realm and reached the powerful major success realm. The various changes in his body were also due to this breakthrough. This change was because his body had been tempered more strongly due to the improvement of his Tao experience realm, thus increasing several times. His power had also become purer and closer to the source of power, so its quantity had also increased a lot. His soul, mental intent, spiritual sea world, and perception had all received a considerable improvement. The saint's decree had also left his body because of this change. After all, the saint's decree was only a kind of restriction set to prevent cultivators from doing whatever they wanted in the city. It did not mean that the saint's decree completely prevented cultivators from cultivating or breaking through. Therefore, when the saint's decree had been created, it had already been set up. However, when a cultivator's Tao experience realm broke through, the decree would leave his body and set up a defensive shield outside. Not only would this prevent the cultivator from destroying the outside world, but it would also prevent the cultivator from attacking the cultivator from the outside world. This was also a kind of benefit of the saint's decree and a reward for the cultivator who was willing to cultivate with the saint's decree. After all, this defensive shield was part of the saint's decree and was also a saint's magical power. Otherwise, it would definitely not affect this defensive shield. Therefore, as long as one cultivated with the saint's decree and broke through, it would be equivalent to breaking through under the protection of the saint. No external factors could affect or interrupt his cultivation breakthrough. This was naturally a rather good thing for cultivators. In this defensive barrier, Luo Fan's joyful smile did not fade. With a single thought, the aura on his body began to rise crazily. In an instant it rose to an unimaginable level. It completely condensed into a substance, and the surrounding void was pressured to the point of almost shattering. However, this kind of aura, it was restricted within the defensive shield and no aura leaked out. It didn't even affect the books around him. Even the book collection in his hand seemed to be unaffected by the aura because of the saint's decree. No matter how much the aura attacked, it wasn't damaged at all. After a long time, Luo Fan's aura slowly retracted and all the strange phenomena on his body disappeared. The smile on his face became even more joyful. When all the changes on his body calmed down, the saint's decree above his head slowly sank, and in the blink of an eye, it merged back into his body. It was as if it had never come out. If this saint's decree is used well, it will be a pretty good tool. Such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. Just then, footsteps came from the door of the library. Luo Fan's mind moved and he sensed that it was a minor completion quasi-sage. In other words, it was equivalent to a void comprehending expert. This kind of existence happened to be the strongest existence in Wisdom City that didn't need to merge with the saint's decree. With a thought, Luo Fan understood that this existence was definitely looking for him. He turned his head and saw an extremely beautiful young woman with an excellent figure standing at the door. The woman had just appeared at the door of the library when she saw Luo Fan looking at her. She couldn't help but blush. She bent her knees and said in an extremely gentle voice, "I'm Yin Yuan. Greetings, senior teacher. Yen Yuan? Not a bad name. I see that your spirit seems to be injured. Are you looking for me to cure it? Luo Fan asked with a smile. Luo Fan had just made a breakthrough. At this moment, his body and mind were in a supreme peak state. He was extremely sensitive to everything happening in the outside world. When he heard this woman speak, he instantly sensed that this woman's spirit was extremely weak. It was as if it could shatter at any time. When the woman heard Luo Fan's words, she couldn't help but show an expression of admiration. She said, "Senior teacher's eyes are like a torch. I was seriously injured in a fight not long ago, causing my spirit to be injured and unable to recover. Seeing that I'm about to die, I boldly came to see senior teacher. I hope senior teacher will take pity on me." Luo Fan chuckled and waved his hand. "Come forward. Let me examine you carefully. If I can save you, I won't refuse." Yen Yuan couldn't help but be overjoyed. She quickly thanked him and walked forward gracefully. Luo Fan was now 70 to 80% sure that the woman in front of him was related to the master of this dreamscape, the intermediate quasi-sage who created this dreamscape. Of course, the possibility of her being an intermediate quasi-sage was very small. After all, the intermediate quasi-sage was already at the peak of the intermediate quasi-sage realm. He was even stronger than Luo Fan. Even if he wanted to enjoy the joy of leveling up in the dreamscape, his current cultivation level should be extremely low. He wouldn't be in this state where he was neither high nor low. If he wanted to enjoy the joy of becoming a sage, he would definitely be a sage now. He wouldn't be at the peak of the void enlightening stage. All these thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind. It was because of these thoughts that Luo Fan agreed to treat Yen Yuan so enthusiastically. Normally, he might agree to treat her, but he wouldn't do it so easily or so directly. At most, he would give her some pointers on how to treat her. At most, he would tell her where to go and what to find to treat her. Could she be a confidant? Luo Fan thought, but his hands didn't stop moving. With a point of his finger, an incomparably pure perception was emitted from his finger. It directly passed through Yen Yuan's forehead and into her Naiwan palace, directly passing through it. It went through the Naiwan palace and entered the woman's sea of consciousness. As soon as this perception entered the sea of consciousness, Luo Fan was even more certain that this woman was related to the intermediate quasi-sage. This was because the sea of consciousness of the woman in front of him was filled with countless strange formations. This was because the sea of consciousness of the woman in front of him was filled with countless strange formations. Each of these formations was unimaginably complicated and mysterious. There were even 70 to 80% of them that Luo Fan hadn't heard of before when he read the tens of millions of books. It should be known that among the tens of millions of books that Luo Fan had read before, although there were very few secret books that wrote down the truly exquisite array techniques in detail, however, there were descriptions of almost every kind of formation. Even if it was impossible for him to grasp those formations based on these descriptions, he would definitely be able to recognize those formations if they appeared in front of him. Among the formations that this woman had mastered, there were actually 70 to 80% of them that Luo Fan hadn't heard of before. This was enough to show that this woman was not ordinary. She must have had a shocking inheritance or an unimaginable fortuitous encounter. Everything that happened in the dream world, it was all under the control of the intermediate quasi-sage. This woman must have had an unimaginable fortuitous encounter or a shocking inheritance. This must be the reason why the intermediate quasi-sage treated this woman differently. From this, it could be seen that this woman must have a close relationship with the intermediate quasi-sage. All sorts of thoughts flashed through his mind, but he didn't hesitate at all. He penetrated through the countless formations and went deep into the woman's sea of consciousness. He saw an extremely complicated and mysterious virtual image of the woman. This was where the woman's soul was. Luo Fan's perception shook slightly and he took on a human form. He landed in front of the woman's virtual image. As a cultivator at the peak of the void enlightening realm, this woman naturally couldn't be unaware of the soul like an ordinary person. When Luo Fan's perception turned into a human form and landed in front of the virtual image, the woman stared at Luo Fan's perception in astonishment. Luo Fan smiled and said, "I'm sorry for my lack of manners." The woman naturally bowed slightly and said, "Senior human teacher, why do you say that? I'm the one who made you tired." Luo Fan chuckled and shook his head. Then, he began to carefully examine the woman's soul. This woman cultivated the Tao of formations. Having cultivated to the minor achievement of the quasi-sage realm, her soul had long been strong and pure to an unimaginable level. Moreover, it was clear and translucent, which was a world of difference from an ordinary person's. Logically speaking, such a spirit should have been incomparably tough and indestructible at the time. However, as long as there was a trace of it left, it would definitely grow and recover over time. In the end, it would completely return to its peak state. However, at this moment, the woman's soul was like a candle in the wind. It was illusory and seemed like it could collapse and disappear at any time. Such a contrast made Luo Fan frown involuntarily. After carefully sensing for a while, Luo Fan finally found the source of this abnormality in the depths of her soul. It was a bright red dot. It was faintly discernible, so faint that he could almost ignore it if he wasn't careful. This bright red was an extremely familiar existence to Luo Fan. It was the bright red that he had comprehended before he stepped into the dream world. It was the bright red of the tide of the times. Of course, this little bit of bright red, not to mention compared to the real trend of the times, even compared to the trace of the mysteries of the trend of the times that Luo Fan had comprehended, it was insignificant to the extreme. However, such an insignificant thing had already caused irreparable harm to Yen Yuan when compared to the profound mysteries of the tide of the times that Luo Fan had comprehended, just like how the profound mysteries of the tide of the times that Luo Fan had comprehended were compared to the true bright red existence of the tide of the times, which had already caused irreparable harm to Yen Yuan. Almost all of her spirit soul's power had been wiped away by this bright red. No matter how tough her spirit soul was, no matter how fast it recovered, it was unable to resist this bright red dot. Her spirit soul showed no signs of recovering at all. On the contrary, it was constantly destroying her soul, causing her soul to collapse and be destroyed. Seeing this, Luo Fan's expression changed greatly. An indescribable look of shock appeared on his face. How could such an existence appear in this dream world? Could it be that the intermediate sage-to-be has comprehended some of the mysteries of the times like me? This was the only thought that flashed in Luo Fan's mind. This world was the dream world of the intermediate sage-to-be. Everything in this world was instinctively created by the intermediate sage-to-be. It was an existence between projection and reality. Therefore, apart from Luo Fan, everything that appeared in this world should be existences that the intermediate quasi-sanctum had already understood. Even the great mastery of sage-to-be, peak mastery of sage-to-be and sage realm mentioned in the abnormal sound were not known by the intermediate sage-to-be. They should be the realms constructed by the intermediate sage-to-be based on the numerous knowledge and rumors accumulated by the intermediate sage-to-be. Under such circumstances, the appearance of the bright red dot, which represented the trend of the times, indicated that the intermediate sage-to-be had at least come into contact with the trend of the times. He might even have begun to comprehend some of the mysteries of the times like Luo Fan. Chapter 920. Luo Fan was not arrogant, nor did he think that he was different from others, nor did he think that he was the only one who could do what he did. However, the traces of the mysteries of the tide of the times that he had comprehended were the result of countless fortuitous coincidences, the accumulation of who knows how many coincidences. Under such circumstances, even if he wasn't arrogant and thought that everything he had done was a unique achievement, He would naturally place the possibility of other people achieving the same achievement as him as an extremely small one. However, the situation at this moment was completely beyond his imagination. He had just understood a bit of the mysteries of the tide of the times, and was just able to display a faint bright red light. But in front of him, a bright red light that was much fainter than what he had comprehended, but its essence was not much weaker. How could he accept this calmly? How could he not be shocked? Luo Fan's perception stopped in Yen Yuan's sea of consciousness. He frowned and did not move for a moment. To Yen Yuan, his actions seemed to be like she could not find the reason. She seemed to be stuck in a difficult problem. Her emotions could not help but sink and her body could not help but sway slightly. It was this sway that made Luo Fan wake up. I can understand that the cultivation of this mid-tier quasi-sage is much higher than mine. It is reasonable that I can understand it. Moreover, there was an unfathomable and powerful existence behind this path. What kind of inconceivable thing could happen? What unimaginable things happened is not surprising. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. With a slight thought, his perception shrunk back into his body. When Luo Fan's perception shrunk back, Yen Yuan asked nervously, "Can I still be saved? Your injury is quite strange, but it is not difficult to cure. However, I am quite interested in the existence that injured you. After you recover, can you take me to see that existence?" Luo Fan smiled. Since he had already found the reason why this woman's soul could not recover, Luo Fan was naturally confident that he could cure this woman. Therefore, he directly said that he could cure her. He was interested in the existence that had injured this woman. Of course, it was because of the existence of the bright red light. This was not only because that being might have a closer relationship with the mid-tier sage-to-be who created this dream world. Perhaps it was intimate, or perhaps it was hatred. In short, it was different from the others. And it was also because of... He cared more about what that existence had comprehended, the mysteries of the times. At this moment, what Luo Fan grasped was only an insignificant trace of the profundity of the trend of the times. Compared to the real trend of the times, it was not enough to describe it as a drop in the ocean. Under such circumstances, any bit of the profundity of the tide of the times that other living beings comprehended could be of great help to him, so how could he not care? When the woman heard Luo Fan's words, she couldn't help but be overjoyed. She hurriedly said, "I hope that Senior Teacher will not be stingy in saving me. As long as Senior is willing, I can bring my teacher to see him at any time." Luo Fan nodded with a smile. He raised a finger, and a colorless radiance with a hint of bright red rushed out from his finger. It poured into the Naiwen Palace between Yen Yuan's eyebrows, and then into her sea of consciousness through the Naiwen Palace. It enveloped her spirit soul, which was formed by an incomparably complex and mysterious formation. The spirit was originally dim and illusory, as if it could collapse and disappear at any time. However, the moment it was enveloped by the radiance, it suddenly became stable, and an eternal charm emanated from the spirit. Following that, the spirit soul contained an incomparably thin amount of energy. The bright red light that Luo Fan might have overlooked trembled slightly, and then began to change its original form of existence. It began to wriggle slightly. This wriggling was extremely weak, but it was also extremely mysterious. As it wriggled, Yen Yuan's spirit seemed to have shed a huge mountain that was originally pressing down on her, and her entire body became extremely relaxed. Vast and boundless spirit power began to appear out of thin air, and it continuously integrated into her spirit, causing it to become stable and powerful at a speed visible to the naked eye. In a short while, the spirit had completely shed its illusory charm, and it was as if it had a physical form. It had an indestructible charm. Upon seeing this, Luo Fan gave it a thought, and the transparent radiance that poured into Yen Yuan's sea of consciousness rotated. The bright red light in her spirit seemed to be strongly attracted, and it directly left the spirit and integrated into the transparent radiance. The moment this bright red dot blended into his mind, Luo Fan suddenly felt endless information flowing through his mind. The amount of information had reached an unimaginable level. If an ordinary exterminator had been in his place, his mind might have exploded from this information, and he would have become a walking corpse. Fortunately, Luo Fan had already broken through the initial success Dao integration realm and reached the great success Dao integration realm. The endurance of his mind was much stronger than before. He did not force himself to accept such an impact of information, and he directly bore it completely. Although there was a huge amount of information, the amount that really stayed in Luo Fan's mind was extremely small. It was almost insignificant. Almost all the other information only treated Luo Fan's mind and memory as a transit station. Although it completely poured in, it seemed to leave in another direction after that, and it kept disappearing. It was just like when he had comprehended the mysteries of the times. Although Luo Fan could not be considered to have expected such a situation, he was considered to have experienced it. He was not moved by this, nor did he stop the information from pouring in, nor did he stop it from disappearing. It was as if he really treated his mind and memory as a transit station, allowing the information to pass through. The entire process happened extremely quickly. In almost less than a breath, all the information that flowed in completely stopped. The remaining traces of information finally revealed themselves in Luo Fan's perception. This information. It was not anything else but a trace of it. It was even considered insignificant compared to the mysteries of the times that Luo Fan had comprehended. The addition of these mysteries did not make the bright red brilliance that Luo Fan had displayed a little more intense. However, Luo Fan felt that he had gained something. Even the cultivation realm that he had just broken through had become more stable. As expected, Luo Fan sensed this gain and let out a long sigh. There was both joy and helplessness in his eyes. He was happy that he was not alone. He was not the only one who had comprehended the mysteries of the times. However, he was helpless because the mastermind behind this was far too scheming. Almost everything about him was included in his calculations. After the brilliance was retracted, Yen Yuan let out a long breath, following which she bowed towards Luo Fan. "Thank you, Seniorin Fan, for saving my life. No need to be so polite." Luo Fan raised his hand and helped her up. At this moment, although Yen Yuan had not fully recovered, she was still extremely weak. She was tens of thousands of times weaker than when she was at her peak state. However, the pressure in her heart made her feel that she could die at any time. It was as though she had never appeared in the first place. She only felt her entire body relax. She felt that her spirit was advancing towards its peak state at an unimaginable speed. How could she not understand that feeling? In just a few breaths of time, Senior Rin Fan had actually completely recovered from the injuries that had troubled her for a long time. How could she not be surprised and grateful? Seeing Yen Yuan stand up, Luo Fan said, "Your body has not fully recovered yet, why don't you rest first? Once your body is fully recovered, you can bring me to find the existence that injured you. How about that?" The lady hurriedly shook her head and said, "I don't need to rest. That place is quite far from here and it will take at least a few months to get there. I can recover along the way. If it's convenient for you, why don't we move now?" Luo Fan naturally did not mind. Since Wisdom City had always been here, the books wouldn't disappear just because of a few months' delay. Hence, he nodded and said, "Since that's the case, I'll have to trouble you to lead the way." As he spoke, he left the library with Yen Yuan. Just as they left the library, they saw the City Lord of Wisdom City, White Eye, rushing over from afar. Luo Fan stopped in his tracks. A few breaths later, White Eye City Lord stood in front of Luo Fan and bowed. "Is it because White Eye wasn't considerate enough that you had to leave before you finished reading the books?" As he spoke, White-Eye City Lord's expression was slightly anxious and fearful. Even though Luo Fan hadn't specially set aside his time to guide White-Eye City Lord in the past few years, White-Eye City Lord knew that Luo Fan liked to teach others, so he had asked Luo Fan for guidance on some difficult questions in cultivation and obtained quite a bit of benefits from it. So, he was extremely unwilling to let Luo Fan leave, and he even hoped that Luo Fan could stay here forever. It was exactly because of these reasons that he was so concerned about Luo Fan's departure at this moment. He was worried that he had done something wrong and offended Luo Fan, so Luo Fan was unwilling to stay here. As for why he was so sure that Luo Fan hadn't finished reading all the books, there was no need to explain. He was the City Lord of Wisdom City, and practically everything in the city was under his control. How could he not know how many books Luo Fan had visited? Luo Fan only smiled and said, "City Lord, your hospitality is very considerate. How is this neglecting me? It's just that I have something to do, so I'll be away for a while. I'll return after some time." White-Eye City Lord could not help but sigh in relief when he heard Luo Fan's words. He naturally wouldn't think that Luo Fan was lying to him. Luo Fan wasn't just going to leave for a while, but to leave directly. With Luo Fan's status, there was no need for him to lie to him. "I see. I was agitated and offended, Master Ren. Please forgive me, Senior." White-Eye City Lord heaved a sigh of relief and said with a slightly ashamed expression, "Originally, Luo Fan was only here to read books. Whether he wanted to leave or not was up to him. Since City Lord Bai Mu had come to ask him questions, it was naturally somewhat rude. Although Luo Fan did not necessarily mind, he had no choice but to apologize. Luo Fan only smiled and said, "It's just a simple question. How can it be considered offending? I still have something to do today, so I'll take my leave first." White-Eye City Lord hurriedly gave his blessings, such as wishing the senior success in everything, and then stepped aside. Luo Fan nodded at Yen Yuan. A cloud appeared under their feet and lifted them up into the sky. They seemed to be moving slowly, but were actually moving very quickly. Not long after they left, a ray of light shot over from outside the city and landed in front of White-Eye City Lord. It was a sage decree. There was no need to say anything else. White-Eye City Lord knew that this was definitely the sage decree that Master Ren had. He kept it, and a disappointed expression appeared on his face. A long while later, he shook his head and left the entrance of the book hiding hall. Luo Fan and Yen Yuan stood on the cloud, reading a book as it slowly floated forwards. But in just a breath, they had crossed thousands of miles. This speed naturally couldn't be compared to Luo Fan's original speed of turning into a rainbow or teleporting. But after all, Yen Yuan's injuries hadn't healed yet and she couldn't take such a fast speed. As such, she could only do this. Along the way, after Yen Yuan pointed out the way forward, she began to ask Luo Fan for advice on various cultivation problems. After all, Luo Fan's name as a master had spread far and wide. It was because of this that Yen Yuan dared to cross such a long distance to seek treatment. At this moment, seeing that they were going to spend a few months together, how could Yen Yuan waste such a good chance? It should be known that in the past thousands of years, cultivators who had been guided by Master Ren would at least know their own weaknesses. Knowing the shackles of one's cultivation and understanding the path to take would bring many benefits. They would directly break through and reach the new realm that they had dreamed of. For example, the City Lord of Hidden Tiger City, Zhang Yuan, had reached the Sage-to-Be realm because of Master Ren's guidance. It was said that the City Lord of Bloody Battle City, Zhan Shui, was almost at his limit. Although Yen Yuan had a great encounter and obtained an extremely precious inheritance, he had spent most of his time exploring and cultivating by himself. God knows how many years had passed and he had accumulated a lot of doubts in his cultivation. Even his cultivation realm had been stuck at his current realm and he could not improve at all. Under such circumstances, encountering an existence who was good at teaching others, and whose cultivation realm was countless times stronger than hers, her performance could be imagined. Luo Fan naturally didn't reject Yen Yuan's various cultivation problems. However, he would give her an answer whenever she asked. Given Luo Fan's major success Dao Integration Realm Cultivation Base, Yen Yuan's minor success Quasi-Sage Peak was naturally not difficult for him. Even if he couldn't think of an answer at the moment, he could figure it out after a little consideration and deduction without any doubts. This process was undoubtedly an extremely rare opportunity for Yen Yuan, and it allowed her to resolve all the questions and problems she'd accumulated in her cultivation for countless years, and it even allowed her to faintly touch the edge of a higher realm. This was also very beneficial for Luo Fan. The reason was not complicated. There were countless formations in Yen Yuan's sea of consciousness, and most of them were unknown to him, and he had never heard of them. Many of Yen Yuan's questions were related to formations that he had never seen or heard of. This broadened his knowledge from another perspective and deepened his understanding of formations. At the same time, he had a better understanding of the intermediate stage sage-to-be who had created this dream realm. Of course, this was not a small benefit. Although Yen Yuan was asking Luo Fan for advice on various cultivation problems, it didn't delay the recovery of her body. As a small stage sage-to-be, her body and spirit had reached an unimaginable state. Endless growth was only the most basic characteristic. As a result, she didn't need to use any special techniques or divine abilities to repair her spirit. As long as she removed the source of the spirit's healing, her spirit would naturally be able to gradually recover and become perfect. Although this process was slower than using healing techniques or divine abilities, the final result was the same. As Yen Yuan's injuries recovered, Luo Fan also increased the speed of the magic cloud. After leaving Wisdom City for a month, Yen Yuan's injuries had mostly recovered. The speed of the magic cloud was more than 100 times faster than when they first set off. 2 months later, Yen Yuan's injuries had completely recovered. The speed of the magic cloud was more than 10,000 times faster than when they first set off. Another 10 days passed at such a high speed. Luo Fan and Yen Yuan arrived at a mountain range tens of thousands of light years away from Wisdom City. This mountain range had already left the circle of cities in the dream world and was in the wilderness of the dream world. Around this mountain range, only a few light years away from the direction they came from, was a small city that was not much bigger than Hidden Tiger City. This dream world was a perfect cultivation world in the dreams of intermediate stage sage-to-be. However, due to the existence of the most basic logic, intermediate stage sage-to-be couldn't make the entire dream world flawless. Therefore, this dream world was full of cities. In this dream world, the place where Luo Fan was previously was the core of the dream world. There were traces of civilization there. Although there were many uninhabited regions in the core region, there would definitely be a city of varying sizes not far away from each other. This unimaginable number of cities formed the circle of civilization and the core of this world. Outside of the core was the boundless wilderness. Among them, there were only barren hills and unruly rivers. There were also countless unintelligent but extremely powerful beasts. Chapter 9:21. The mountain range was extremely huge, spanning a radius of several million miles. In the mountain range, ancient trees could be seen and tigers and apes could be heard. As he stood on the auspicious cloud, Luo Fan sensed the auras of countless powerful living beings. Although the mountain range was located in the wilderness and was not the core civilization of the dream world, it was still a mountain range in the dream world after all. The living beings that lived in it naturally followed the basic rules of the dream world. Even the ants there were at the Khanate Zenith Heaven Realm. Among the countless Khanate Zenith Heaven Realm cultivators, there was a faintly discernible aura. Although the aura was extremely obscure and hard to detect, the way it was restrained was definitely not something that a Khanate Zenith Heaven Realm cultivator could do. According to Luo Fan's deduction, the existence was at least at the initial mastery of the quasi-saint realm. Perhaps it was at the initial mastery or the intermediate mastery of the quasi-saint realm. However, no matter how profound its cultivation realm was, it could not be stronger than Luo Fan. After all, if its cultivation realm was higher than Luo Fan's, Luo Fan would not be able to sense its restrained aura. That person is in this mountain range. I came here to collect a type of Ganoderma grass, and was seen by that person. For some reason, after asking a few questions, he did not say anything and attacked me directly. I was not strong enough, but I was almost killed by him with a single move. Fortunately, he did not really kill me for some reason, so I was able to find Master Ren to save me, Yen Yuan said with lingering fear. So that's how it is. Luo Fan nodded, but he slightly understood what was going on. With a thought, his aura was released toward the mountain range in the shape of a cone. At this moment, he could perfectly unleash the power of his greater mastery of the Tao integration realm. The release of this aura was extremely vast, almost causing the entire mountain range to distort slightly as if it was about to collapse into nothingness. Because he released his aura in the shape of a cone, Yen Yuan did not sense this aura at all even though she was beside him. He was not affected in the slightest. At the instant the aura enveloped the entire mountain range, a violent aura shot into the sky from within the mountain range, directly colliding with the aura released by Luo Fan. This soaring aura was exactly what Luo Fan had sensed earlier. Yen Yuan did not sense any trace of the aura of the sage-to-be minor mastery or above. When this aura collided with Luo Fan's aura, it instantly produced a world-shaking tremor. An extremely powerful shockwave spread out in all directions from the point of impact, creating spatial ripples visible to the naked eye. The space within a radius of tens of millions of kilometers seemed to be twisted by a giant hand. Although Luo Fan's aura was stronger than that aura, he was still able to sense it. However, they were scattered across the entire mountain range after all, so they seemed a little scattered. Although the new violent aura was much weaker than Luo Fan's aura, it was concentrated and directly bombarded some important points of Luo Fan's aura. Luo Fan's aura did not disperse the violent aura, and the violent aura could not counterattack against Luo Fan's aura. Using the aura to fight. It was possible to test the opponent at the beginning, but it was somewhat unrealistic to rely on it to defeat the opponent. Therefore, seeing that his aura had drawn out the existence of the sage-to-be minor mastery or above, Luo Fan withdrew his aura and stood on the auspicious cloud, waiting. After a short while, a long roar was heard from the mountain range. Then, a large black cloud rose up and finally appeared in the void at the same height as Luo Fan, condensing and motionless. The dark cloud was huge and spanned thousands of miles. Compared to it, the auspicious cloud that Luo Fan and Yen Yuan were standing on was as small as a sesame compared to a ping-pong ball. Above the dark cloud, there was not only one figure. There were tens of thousands of figures densely packed together. Among these figures, standing at the very front was a rather skinny middle-aged man. Behind this middle-aged man were a dozen young men lined up in a row. Behind these dozen or so youths were tens of thousands of exotic beasts. Among them, as soon as Luo Fan saw the middle-aged man, he knew that he was the existence whose aura collided with his earlier. He was also the strongest existence in the entire mountain range, above the sage-to-be minor mastery. On the other hand, even though those youths were much weaker than him, every single one of them was an initial stage quasi-saint. In other words, they had already stepped into the quasi-saint realm, and they were far stronger than ordinary grand heavenly immortal realm cultivators. As for the tens of thousands of strange beasts behind them, although each of them was only an innate grand Luo realm cultivator, their aura was intertwined and their power was greatly increased. They were many times stronger than their original strength combined and could participate in a battle of the sage-to-be. "Why are you here?" The skinny middle-aged man who was the leader was puzzled and asked. "Looks like I'm not the person you're waiting for," said Luo Fan with a chuckle. I didn't expect this woman to find someone else to stand up for her. What a miscalculation, said the skinny middle-aged man indignantly. Fellow Taoist, you're wrong. I'm not here to stand up for Yen Yuan. It's just that Yen Yuan's injuries piqued my interest, so I came here to ask for your advice. I hope to see your methods again. Luo Fan did not ask who he was waiting for. Instead, he stated his purpose of coming here. That was his only purpose of coming here. As for whether the skinny middle-aged man believed him or not, it did not matter to him. The middle-aged man frowned. It was obvious that he did not agree with what Luo Fan said. However, since this person was already here and had unscrupulously pressured them with his aura, it was impossible for the skinny middle-aged man to remain indifferent. With a thought, he snorted and said, "My name is Feng Wang. May I know how I should address you, fellow Taoist?" Since Luo Fan had addressed him as a fellow Taoist, he would naturally address Luo Fan as a fellow Taoist. This was how cultivators interacted. Luo Fan. Luo Fan chuckled and said his name. So it's fellow Taoist Luo Fan. Since fellow Taoist is interested, I won't be stingy with my methods. What do you plan to do? Feng Wang asked calmly. Nothing much. I'll just have to fight. Luo Fan chuckled. A cold glint flashed through Baian's eyes. That cold glint seemed to contain the feeling that it was just as he had expected. Then I won't stand on ceremony, Feng Wang said as he raised his hand and waved. The dozen young men behind him and the tens of thousands of strange beasts behind them trembled. Boundless power radiated from their bodies and instantly intertwined with the dark cloud beneath their feet. With the addition of the tens of thousands of powers, the dark cloud became several times denser and thicker. In an instant, it became several times denser, and its thickness also increased by several times. The thickening did not only increase downward, but it was also increasing in both directions. Feng Wang was already a mid-tier quasi-saint, which was equivalent to the Tao integration realm. His cultivation base was not as good as Luo Fan's, which was equivalent to the Tao integration realm. Although his cultivation base was not as good as Luo Fan's, it was only equivalent to the early-stage Tao integration realm. However, such a realm was enough for him to sense how terrifying Luo Fan was and understand that Luo Fan was a supreme existence that was far stronger than him. When facing a stronger existence, cultivators naturally would not have the fighting spirit to defeat a stronger opponent. Instead, they would try their best to use all the power they could to close the gap between them and their opponent. Therefore, Baian had only just begun, but he had already gathered all of his power, as well as the power of the tens of thousands of living beings behind him, into one place. It allowed one's strength to be greatly improved. Eventually, it would reach a realm comparable to Luo Fan's. Luo Fan saw Feng Wang's method of gathering power. Although he had countless ways to interrupt it, he did not use any of them. After all, he had come here to see the profoundness that he had comprehended from the era tide, not to kill Feng Wang. Under such circumstances, the more Swan Ni was able to unleash its own power, the more it suited him. After the dark cloud thickened several times, it gradually began to shrink. As it shrank, an extremely violent aura grew at an unimaginable speed. Gradually, it dissipated from the dark clouds. This aura was essentially the same as the aura that had collided with Luo Fan earlier. However, it quickly increased in intensity to a level that surpassed Feng Wang's aura. Even Luo Fan felt his mind tremble in the face of this aura. When this feeling appeared, Luo Fan understood. Luo Fan understood that after Swan Ni had gathered the power of several tens of thousands of living beings, in terms of power, it was already stronger than him. After understanding this, Luo Fan did not feel worried. Instead, a faint smile appeared on his face. With so much power gathered together, if there is no special method to control it, there will definitely be many flaws. Let me see what method you will use to eliminate these flaws. Such a thought flashed through his mind. At this moment, Yen Yuan finally could not help but speak up. Senior human teacher, hurry and interrupt him. If he continues to grow like this, his strength will not be able to withstand it. It's fine. I want his strength to increase so that I can see what he's capable of. If he was like before, he would not be a threat to me at all. Why would I need to see what he's capable of? Luo Fan chuckled. Although his calm expression didn't completely dispel Yen Yuan's worries, it still gave her some comfort and calmed her down a little. She wasn't as nervous as she was before. As they spoke, the dark cloud, which had originally been thousands of miles in radius, had already been compressed to a height of 10 feet. For the dark cloud to be compressed to such an extent, it was easy to imagine how much it had been compressed. At this moment, the dark cloud had already turned into an extremely pitch-black crystal. As it floated there, it seemed to attract all the light in the universe into it. It made one feel as if they would not be able to come out if they gazed into it. The black crystal constantly twisted and changed, finally forming the appearance of a middle-aged man that was 10 feet tall. It was the appearance of Feng Wang. Apart from being pitch-black in color and being 10 times taller, there was no other difference. When the transformation stabilized, an aura that was 10 times stronger than Luo Fan's directly pressed towards Luo Fan. In the face of such an aura that was 10 times stronger than his own, Luo Fan's complexion remained unchanged. He raised his hand and gently pointed. There was a subtle force that rushed out of his hand. It gently vibrated in the void and directly cut into a certain position of the aura. Although this power was extremely weak, the place where it cut into was extremely mysterious. As it vibrated gently, the aura that was 10 times stronger than his own directly swept past him, like a waterfall that was blocked by a reef. It directly bypassed him, and Yen Yuan who was behind him. It wouldn't affect them in the slightest. Although most of the flaws have been eliminated, a condensed aura is still a condensed aura. It will always be different from a single aura, so there is still a difference in the degree of condensation. Luo Fan sighed, seemingly very disappointed. He. The black crystal-like middle-aged man laughed coldly in a very strange manner. This aura is just a method for me to vent my emotions. Do you think that I want to use it as my main attack? As he spoke, in a flash, he had already arrived above Luo Fan's head. He raised his hand and punched fiercely at Luo Fan. This speed simply surpassed time. The power even surpassed space. In an instant, the space that his fist passed through was twisted into countless spatial powder, turning into a thick fog that spread in all directions. And within this thick fog, there was even a kind of fist power. In the process of spreading out, it continuously corroded the space, turning the space that the thick fog passed through into spatial powder. This caused the spatial powder fog to expand at an unimaginable speed. In the face of such a terrifying punch, Luo Fan's eyes flashed, but he did not sense anything he wanted to sense from it. Slightly disappointed, he raised his hand to block above his head. "Since you don't want to use it, then let me do it," he said. On his palm there was a faint, extremely thin, bright red light. If he did not clearly see it, he would have overlooked it. After this bright red light appeared, although his palm had just blocked above his head, it naturally gave off a feeling of eternity. This feeling had always existed above his head since ancient times. There was even a charm that could not be shaken by the flow of time. Luo Fan's speed was not any slower than the black crystal-like middle-aged man's speed. The moment the bright red light appeared on his palm, the black crystal-like middle-aged man's huge fist had already landed on his palm. This black crystal-like middle-aged man was around 10 zhang tall. When he clenched his fist, it was like a black ball with a diameter of 5 qi. In comparison, his size was even bigger than Luo Fan's body. Such a fist landed on Luo Fan's open palm. One could imagine the disparity between the two. Seeing that Luo Fan used his palm to block his fist, the middle-aged man was shocked, suspecting if Luo Fan was plotting something, After all, he was already in the intermediate stage of quasi-sage, so he naturally would not suspect that this cultivator with higher cultivation realm than him was a battle idiot who would use his weakness to block his strength. Thus, he raised his vigilance to the highest, carefully sensing every movement of Luo Fan's body, ready to block any schemes that Luo Fan might use at any time. However, the result made him inconsolable. Luo Fan didn't have any tricks up his sleeves. He actually used his own palms to resist Luo Fan's fist, which was powerful enough to destroy the world. Moreover, he actually withstood it. The instant the fist came into contact with the palm, Tao Wu only felt as if his fist had struck a barrier with an attribute that could not be broken. An incomparably powerful force surged towards him from the point of contact, but the palm did not tremble at all. The force exerted by Lao Ai was the limit of his fist, but the endurance of his body could not be equal to that of his fist. Thus, when the rebounding force passed through his fist to his arm and shoulder, he only felt a numbness in those parts. Then, he could no longer feel those parts. They were directly shattered by the rebounding force, collapsed and disappeared, turned into black smoke, and gradually dissipated in the void. This process was so straightforward that it made him feel an indescribable fear. How is this possible? His strength is clearly much weaker than mine, so why didn't my full strength make his palm move at all? This was the only thought that flashed through Lao Ai's mind. However, he was not an ordinary person after all. His reaction speed was also extremely fast. Seeing that his punch was ineffective, his body naturally reacted. He turned his body, and his right leg, which had the power to shatter spacetime, directly kicked towards Luo Fan's chest. Luo Fan's palm, which was originally above his head, turned slightly and was already in front of his chest. This time, he did not block it. Instead, he reached forward and grabbed Lao Ai's right leg, which was like a black crystal, that was aimed at his chest. Whether it was Luo Fan's grab or Swannee's kick, they only looked ordinary. In fact, there were so many changes that they could be counted in the hundreds of millions. Every single change was enough to be used as a combat textbook. Chapter 922. The Power of Calamity? It seems that he only comprehended some of the mysteries of the times by chance, but he doesn't know the real truth behind it. This thought suddenly flashed across Luo Fan's mind. With this thought, he slightly retracted his palm, which was about to hit the Swannee's foot. Of course, he didn't retract his palm and let the foot hit his chest without any reservation. Instead, he slightly slowed down the speed at which he was reaching for the foot. This slowing down was insignificant to an ordinary living being, even a lesser tier sage to be. It wouldn't change the result at all. However, it was a crucial change to the Tao integration realm, which was also the intermediate tier sage to be. At this moment, the Swanee had a chance to react. Power surged all over its body, and its black crystal-like body instantly became transparent and blurry. It seemed as if all the power in it had been completely absorbed, leaving only a means to maintain its original appearance. Along with this change, the right foot that was about to kick Luo Fan's chest had a faint red light that was much fainter than the red light on Luo Fan's palm. Following the appearance of the bright red light, the right leg suddenly gave off an unbreakable and eternal feeling. Seeing this change, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. His right hand suddenly sped up and directly crossed the void to collide with the foot. In an instant, an earth-shattering boom erupted from the point of collision. The void shattered and time was broken. A feeling of the destruction of the world instantly surged into the minds of the three people present. In particular, Yen Yuan felt as if she had turned into powder. Even her consciousness seemed to be on the verge of collapsing and disappearing at any time. When Luo Fan's right hand and Swannee's enlarged foot collided, an incomparably powerful shockwave spread out in all directions. Under this shockwave, the space-time shook like a piece of paper, then shattered and disintegrated. The whole process looked very strange and mysterious. After all, the bright red light on Luo Fan's palm was relatively dense. Its power was far from being comparable to the bright red light on Swanee's right foot. During this confrontation, the Swanee's right foot disintegrated and disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. This disintegration and disappearance continued to spread upwards, passing through his ankles, his calves, his thighs, and it looked like his entire lower body was about to be pulverized into powder. At this moment, the Swanee finally reacted and roared. The 30-meter-tall crystal body suddenly collapsed and turned into a huge mass of dark clouds that surged in all directions. Amidst the dark clouds, Tao Wu's body had already become extremely tattered. His entire body was covered in blood and his face was extremely pale. The power within his body was surging as if he had lost control of it and was constantly destroying his body. Behind him, only 3 or 4 youths were left, and the tens of thousands of strange beasts were reduced to less than 100. This horrifying scene caused Yen Yuan, who was watching from the side, to tremble. However, Luo Fan's expression did not change in the face of this. Although the degree of devastation in front of him was a little beyond his expectations, he had already expected that the Swanee would have to pay a shocking price in order to use the destructive force he mentioned. It would not be as easy as it was for him. The price he had to pay was reasonable to him, so he naturally did not change his expression. "Who the hell are you?" Swanee asked when he saw that Luo Fan was hovering there motionless and did not seem to have any intention of continuing to attack him. "I've already said it before. I just want to see your means, the destructive force you mentioned," Luo Fan said with a shake of his head. "Don't you already have the power of calamity? Moreover, you've mastered it better than me. Why are you still interested in my destructive force?" Swanee said angrily. At this moment, the impact and destruction caused by the collision between Luo Fan's palm and Swanee's right foot had already subsided. This was the dream world. As long as the intermediate stage of the sage-to-be did not think that this world would be destroyed, this world would not be destroyed. Although the destruction just now was enough to shatter spacetime, the intermediate stage of the sage-to-be's instinctive control allowed him to completely recover in just a few breaths. During this process, other than Luo Fan, who felt that it was a little abrupt, both Tao Wu and Yen Yuan felt that it was natural and not strange at all. "Because I'm also just a beginner." A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. At this moment, Tao Wu's body was in tatters, and he had exhausted a great deal of his mind. He had even reached the point where he could hardly control his own power. Among his subordinates, most of the creatures that could provide him with power had died. How could they still be a match for Luo Fan? Seeing Luo Fan in such a state, Swanee was furious and itched to tear Luo Fan into pieces. However, he could not do anything about it. He could only look at Luo Fan as if he was a lunatic. His mouth opened but did not know what to say. Seeing Bai An's reaction, Luo Fan's mind was slightly moved, and he said, "I see that your mastery is worse than mine. Why don't you tell me how you mastered this, annihilation force?" He did not make any threats or make any gestures. His tone was indifferent, as if he was asking an old friend. But after the previous few moves, it was clear that Bai An couldn't really treat his words as an old friend asking each other a question. Nor did he think that Swanee would leave if he refused to answer. Therefore, even if he was extremely unwilling and displeased, he could only say, "I only obtained the destructive force by chance." Even if someone else repeated it, they would not be able to obtain it. Luo Fan chuckled and said, "That's my problem. You only need to tell me how you obtain the power." Swanee nodded and said, "That's fine, but I have a request." "What's your request?" Luo Fan smiled and said, "After I tell you, leave this place immediately and never appear in front of me again," Swanee said coldly. "I have no intention of staying here in the first place. You don't have to worry about that." Luo Fan did not take Swanee's rude words to heart at all. He did not become angry because of it, nor did he feel that he was offended. At this moment, he had already seen through all sorts of falsehoods. Verbal insults and compliments made no difference to him. If the other party cursed him, he would not lose his composure because of it, and if the other party praised him, he would not lose his composure because of it. He would not change his original plan because of this. At most, he would slap those who scolded him to death when it was convenient for him. With such a mentality, he did not care about Swanee's rude words at all, nor did he deliberately say that he would not leave because of them. Swanee was currently a fish on a chopping block. Even if Luo Fan said anything else, he could only accept it. Since Luo Fan had already agreed at this moment, he naturally couldn't say anything to convince him that he would keep his promise and so on. He directly said, "All right, come with me." With that, he waved his hand. The creatures behind him dispersed, while he rode on the dark cloud that had shrunk by countless times and descended towards a certain location in the mountain range below. It was obvious that the place where he had obtained the destruction energy by chance was in this mountain range. This was to be expected. If he had obtained a great power like the power of calamity, he would not have let this place go out of his control. Almost anyone would have made the choice to live here. At this moment, Luo Fan's perception had already covered the entire mountain range. In his perception, all the creatures in this mountain range were as bright and dazzling as a torch in the dark. He was even more confident that he could completely destroy them with a single thought. Under such circumstances, he naturally wouldn't worry about Tao Wu's conspiracy causing him harm. As a result, he followed behind Swanee without any hesitation and descended towards a certain place in the mountain range below. At this moment, Yen Yuan was already rather dumbfounded. Yen Yuan was a minor completion quasi-saint, which was equivalent to a void comprehending expert. Such an existence could not be considered a peak existence in Dreamscape, but she could still be considered an expert. Moreover, she was not a city lord and possessed an unimaginably powerful legacy. Under such circumstances, her knowledge and experience would naturally not be too low. Even in her countless years of experience, she had never seen someone like Luo Fan. He had directly attacked and crippled the other party, then acted as if he trusted the other party greatly and followed him to a completely unfamiliar place without any hesitation. Was this confidence or recklessness? For a moment, Yen Yuan suddenly had the thought of getting as far away from Luo Fan as possible. Fortunately, she was still rational. She knew that she was in the lair of the Swan and I. Even the small success quasi-sages who had survived were enough to put her in great danger. They were enough to kill her and scatter her soul. Under such circumstances, how could she dare to stray too far from Luo Fan? It should be noted that in the wilderness, the only relatively safe place for her was by her master's side, Luo Fan's side. In comparison, it was much safer to step into the unknown place below with his master than to leave alone. As a result, after these thoughts flashed through her mind, she obediently followed beside Luo Fan. Together with Luo Fan and Swanee, they landed at a certain cave in the mountain range. This cave entrance was not where Bai An's cave was located. Instead, it was in an area not too far away from his abode. The inside of the cave was pitch black, as if even the light had been absorbed by it. Even Luo Fan couldn't see what was inside the cave. Even his perception felt as if it had been completely cut off after entering the cave. He was completely unable to sense what was inside the cave. In the surroundings of the cave there was a strange aura. This aura did not cause any negative consequences such as the loss of life in the surroundings. However, a large area of space around the cave seemed to be completely separated from the outside world. It was as if it was completely independent, becoming a different space-time from Dream World. This feeling was nothing to Luo Fan, but for Swanee, who was born and raised in Dream World, it was rather difficult to accept. It made him feel as if his connection with the world had been completely cut off. It was precisely because of this that Bai An did not set up the cave around the cave. Instead, it was set up in a place not too far away from the cave. It seems that he didn't lie. Luo Fan sensed the peculiarities of this cave, and such a thought flashed through his mind. It was the first time Luo Fan had sensed the strange aura coming from the cave, and he could not accurately describe what it was. However, the aura was filled with a realistic quality. The space-time that was infiltrated by the aura would have a realistic quality to it. This realistic quality made the space-time infiltrated by the aura different from the dream world in the outside world. The dream world in the outside world was a strange world between projection and reality. Adding a kind of reality to such a world would naturally break the balance between projection and reality, separating the infiltrated space-time from the outside world and making it quite different. This was also why the space-time around the cave made Swanee feel so uncomfortable. The proportion between reality and projection in this space-time was already completely different from the proportion of reality and projection in his body. In this dream world, an aura that contained a realistic quality was certainly mysterious beyond imagination. This was in line with the characteristics of the place where Swanee could comprehend some of the mysteries of the times. I obtained the power of destruction from this cave. Swanee stood at the entrance of the cave. Although his expression did not change, his eyes became a little irritated, as if he was very reluctant to step into the cave. The aura here does indeed have this kind of foundation. Luo Fan nodded. Seeing that Luo Fan had no intention of entering himself, Swanee knew what Luo Fan meant. He sighed, forcefully suppressing his irritation, and stepped into the cave first. Luo Fan smiled and said to Yen Yuan, "You should feel very uncomfortable here. The aura inside should be even stronger. If you can't stand it, you can stay here." Yen Yuan was about to refute and say that she could stand it. Suddenly, she felt as if there was a violent fluctuation in the cave. The surrounding aura suddenly jumped, and in an instant, it increased by 10 times, then returned to normal. She could not help but tremble, and swallowed the words that she was about to say. She nodded and said, "Then I will congratulate Senior Ren on your success here." Luo Fan chuckled, nodded, and stepped into the cave. As soon as he stepped into the cave, Luo Fan was slightly taken aback, because there was light in front of him. The surrounding cave walls emitted a faint fluorescent light, illuminating the path ahead. There was no longer the pitch-black appearance from the outside. Turning back to look at the cave entrance, he saw that it was also pitch-black, and he could not see what the situation outside was like at all. It is indeed mysterious. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but sigh in admiration. He turned his head and said to Tao Wang, who was waiting at the side, "Let's go." At this time, the irritation in Bian Shi's eyes was 10 times stronger than before. Fortunately, it had not broken through the control of his rationality. His behavior and demeanor did not change much because of this. After listening to Luo Fan's instructions, he nodded and walked into the depths of the cave. Although this place was only a line away from the outside world, the aura was dozens of times stronger. And the real characteristics contained in the aura were dozens of times stronger. It was because of this increase that Swanee became even more irritable than the outside world. Luo Fan and Swanee unhurriedly walked into the depths of the cave. The cave even slanted downwards, and the deeper they went, the deeper they seemed to go. After walking for more than 2 hours, the two seemed to have covered a distance of several hundred kilometers before they arrived at their destination. Or rather, the destination that Swanee was referring to. This was not the deepest part of the cave. There was still an unknown distance in front of them before they reached the end of the cave. The reason why they stopped here was because the aura here was so strong that it had condensed into something solid. The realness was so strong that Swanee could not bear it, and he could not go any deeper no matter what. "This is the place. This is where I obtained the power of destruction. Back then, I couldn't bear the pressure of the aura here and fainted. When I woke up, I comprehended the method to gather and use the power of calamity," Bian said as he held his head with one hand, a pained expression on his face. Luo Fan's senses were extremely sharp, and he instantly sensed that the power in Swanee's body was surging. His mind was in chaos, and his soul was on the verge of collapsing. Knowing that Swanee was not lying, he nodded and said, "Since that's the case, you can wait here. I'll continue on my own." With that, he raised his hand and slapped towards Swanee. If Swanee was at his peak, he would not have been hit by Swanee so easily. Even if he could not dodge it completely, he would definitely be able to block it for a while, and Luo Fan would have to spend some effort to hit him. However, at this moment, Swanee was in such a terrible state that he almost fainted. Furthermore, Luo Fan's slap contained the profound mysteries of martial arts, so there was no way he could resist. In an instant, Luo Fan's palm made contact with his head. Swanee's eyes flashed with anger when he slapped him, but he collapsed to the ground and fainted. After slapping Swanee unconscious, Luo Fan shook his head and sighed before continuing deeper into the cave. The surrounding aura was so strong that it had condensed into something solid. It had turned into a faint mist that filled the cave. Although it was not to the point where one could not even see their own fingers in front of them, it was still a great hindrance to one's vision. It was almost impossible to see the path forward with his eyes. Fortunately, there was only one path in the cave. As long as one kept walking forward, there were no forks in the road, and there was no need for him to recognize the path. As a result, Luo Fan was not affected much. To be continued. Chapter 923. As he ventured deeper, the aura in the cave grew stronger and stronger, and there was more and more truth contained within it. For Tao Wu, who was born and raised in the dream realm, the stronger this aura was, the more pressure he felt. However, for Luo Fan, the stronger this aura was, the more comfortable it made him feel. This was because this was the aura of the real world. The joy that this aura contained brought him was enough to offset the pressure that the aura was exerting on him, and it was enough for him to easily endure it. Luo Fan continued to walk down, and after walking for a distance similar to the path that Tao Wu had taken, he arrived at the place where the aura was the strongest, and saw the deepest part of the cave. When he saw this, Luo Fan suddenly understood why Tao Wu had comprehended the truth of the trend of the times, because he had been unconscious for a period of time. What appeared in front of him was none other than a brand. This brand seemed to contain all the mysteries of infinite space and time. The aura that was so strong that it had almost condensed into a solid form was emitted from this brand. That aura contained the truth, which was also the truth contained in the brand. When Luo Fan looked at this brand in front of him, the word sage flashed across his mind. No matter how he thought about it, there was only one possibility for this brand to make him feel so directly. This brand is the brand of a sage. Apart from the brand of a sage, there is no other brand that can make him think like this. When he understood that this brand was the brand of a sage, everything that had happened to Tao Wu and the various abnormalities in the cave were all explained to him. However, he still did not understand why this sage brand was so real, and why Tao Wu could comprehend the mysteries of the trend of the times from the aura emitted by the sage brand. However, this did not stop him from obtaining his own answer. A sage was an omnipotent existence, and Luo Fan could not understand what kind of magical powers a sage had. Under such circumstances, everything that was impossible happening to a saint was not something unbelievable to Luo Fan. Although the one in front of him was not a saint, it was the mark of a saint. Its power might be countless times weaker than that of a real saint, but compared to an existence like Luo Fan who had not become a saint, it was still countless times stronger. What's so strange about being able to let you comprehend a little bit of the mysteries of the times? This brand should be the brand of a true saint, and not any of the four saints in this dreamscape. Otherwise, this imprint would not have been emitted in such a real manner, Luo Fan thought as he stopped in his tracks and looked at the saint's imprint from afar. Although it was only a brand, the power contained within it caused Luo Fan's heart to tremble. Although he was still hundreds of feet away from the mark, He already felt that any change that happened to the mark could cause him to die without a burial place. Even turning into powder would be impossible. He stood there quietly, carefully thinking about why this imprint would appear here. The saint's imprint was a product of a living being who had not become a saint seeing a saint with their own eyes. The saint's body contained all sorts of mysteries that were condensed in their memories. This kind of imprint usually appeared in the memories of living beings and appeared in the depths of their souls. It was impossible for it to appear in the outside world. Now that such an imprint had appeared here, the reason behind it was worth pondering. Come to think of it, it should be because this world is the dreamscape of a medium-tier sage-to-be. This saint's imprint is obviously an extremely profound existence to a medium-tier sage-to-be. That medium-tier sage-to-be may have obtained countless benefits from it, but it is impossible for him to completely understand its mysteries. Therefore, when this imprint appears in his dreamscape, it must exist in the form of an imprint. It is impossible for the medium-tier sage-to-be to integrate its mysteries into the dreamscape. Luo Fan thought and roughly guessed the reason for the appearance of this saint's imprint. He did not know which saint this saint's imprint came from, nor did he know why a medium-tier sage-to-be could see a saint's body. However, for a medium-tier sage-to-be who was determined on the path of Tao, seeing a saint and condensing a saint's imprint in the depths of his memories was a great opportunity for him, and he would definitely cherish such an opportunity. In this way, even if he was in a dreamscape, he would definitely not let go of this imprint. He would definitely instinctively want to bring this imprint into the dreamscape. Everything in the dreamscape was under his control. With this thought in mind, the saint's imprint would naturally appear here. Because of all these, the saint's imprint would appear in this cave at this moment. After thinking this through, Luo Fan let out a long sigh. With a thought, his mind locked onto the saint's imprint in the depths of his memories. Back when his original body had just returned to the Earth universe, he had captured the space-time god and used all sorts of mysterious technique. After expending a lot of energy, he had finally taken a great risk and transferred the saint's imprint from the space-time god's memories into the depths of his own. That imprint was an extremely mysterious existence. Even though he was only a mental doppelganger and not his original body in the Earth universe, he still had the same memories as his original body and the same saint's imprint. Therefore, even though the imprint was not personally obtained by the mental doppelganger, it still existed in the depths of his memories. However, to him, the saint's imprint was like a baby who had yet to learn how to read and write in front of a PhD course. The first time he saw it, he received a great shock and obtained some small gains. In the future, no matter how much energy he spent on it, no matter how much time he spent on it, he did not gain anything from it. Therefore, even though he completely understood that the saint's imprint was a priceless treasure, he could not obtain any benefits from it no matter what he did. His cultivation could not increase by relying on the imprint either. Instead, he could only rely on himself to slowly comprehend the mysteries of the Tao. The saint's imprint was an extremely mysterious existence. It was the condensation of the mysteries of the saint's body in the depths of the memories, but it was not independent. In other words, it was not a single saint, but a ball of saints' imprint. Instead, no matter how many saints one met, the saint's imprint would condense in one place and form a ball of saints' imprint. Therefore, even though the time god had met the 7 saints, his saint's imprint was only a ball of saints' imprint. Moreover, it did not look much different from the saint's imprint before him, as if there was not much of a difference. This was only natural. According to theory, the more sages one saw, the more mysteries one would obtain from the sage imprint, and the more they would sense. However, for cultivators who had not become sages, the mysteries contained in a sage imprint were limitless. If more mysteries were added to the limitless imprint, wouldn't it still be limitless? What difference would it make to him? The saint's imprint gradually surfaced from the depths of his memories, and compared it with the imprint in the depths of the cave before him. Luo Fan gradually discovered some extremely subtle similarities between the two. The auras of the two were actually somewhat similar. It was as if the imprint in the depths of his memories contained the saint's imprint before him. This feeling was enough for Luo Fan. He could only feel this much. The saint's imprint was too advanced for him, even more advanced than the saint's shadow. It seems that this saint's imprint should have come from one of the 7 saints who appeared at the end of the Age of Chaos. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Understanding this, he could not help but sink into an indescribable thought. Could it be that this intermediate quasi-sage was a cultivator from the Age of Sages? Or perhaps, before the Age of Sages, one of the 7 saints had already awakened? Or was that intermediate stage quasi-sage a cultivator from the Age of Chaos? All these thoughts were in a mess, causing Luo Fan's thoughts to be in a mess. However, Luo Fan's ability to control his body was beyond imagination. Very soon, he had already escaped from this question that he couldn't think of an answer to no matter how hard he thought. He began to carefully observe the saint's imprint before him. This saint's imprint was not in the depths of the cultivator's memory, but in the outside world. To be more precise, it appeared in a dream world. Under such circumstances, this imprint was naturally different from the one in the depths of the cultivator's memory. For Luo Fan, this difference was incomparably precious, because it might allow him to comprehend some of the mysteries. After carefully observing this imprint for a while, Luo Fan could not help but reveal a pleasantly surprised smile. This imprint was indeed very different from the one in the depths of his memory. This difference was very subtle, but also very mysterious. Compared to the imprint in the depths of his memory, the saint's imprint before him seemed to have been awakened from a deep slumber, or rather, it had been activated from an eternal slumber. At this moment, the imprint did not seem to have changed at all, but in reality, it was undergoing changes that surpassed the limits of Luo Fan's eyesight. It was constantly releasing the supreme might contained within it, as if it was resisting something. Luo Fan only needed to think for a moment to know what it was resisting. Although this sage imprint did not have any living will, nor did it have any spirituality, it was purely formed from various principles and mysteries. However, it was still the principles and mysteries of the saint's body. Such a mysterious existence naturally possessed all sorts of unimaginable powers. And one of its powers was the perfection of nature. This perfect power endowed the imprint with the ability to resist the dreamscape, allowing it to constantly resist the assimilation of the dreamscape, making it impossible for the dreamscape to completely assimilate the imprint. This change in the imprint was a sign of this resistance. The truth that the saint's imprint emitted was also a sign of resistance. For Luo Fan, this kind of behavior was still confusing, and he was even more unable to grasp the true reason behind it. However, this kind of change made the imprint become active, and the various mysteries that were originally lying quietly began to take effect according to its own characteristic. This was like a demonstration of the various mysteries to Luo Fan. This naturally greatly reduced the difficulty for him to comprehend the mysteries. How could he not be pleasantly surprised? After understanding this, Luo Fan instantly threw all other thoughts to the back of his mind. Finding the intermediate sage to be who created this dreamscape, making a name for himself, becoming a teacher, Yen Yuan and Tao Wu, all these thoughts were thrown to the back of his mind. Compared to the activated saint's imprint, everything else was nothing. As long as he could comprehend all the mysteries of the saint's imprint, even if he could not become a sage, he would definitely be many times stronger than he was now. Even becoming a Tao master would not be a fantasy. In this way, it was acceptable for him to stay in this dreamscape forever. Moreover, as long as his cultivation could surpass the intermediate stage of sage to be, it would be extremely easy for him to transcend this dreamscape and break through it. Under such circumstances, why would he care about anything else? With this thought in mind, Luo Fan activated his perception and directly enveloped the saint's imprint in front of him. Every time his cultivation realm made a breakthrough, his perception would naturally be greatly improved. At this moment, he had reached the profound completion of the Tao integration, so his perception was naturally many times stronger than before. When this perception was released, even the powerful aura emitted by the saint's imprint had to dodge it, allowing Luo Fan's perception to directly envelop it. The moment this perception enveloped the imprint, an indescribable pain suddenly attacked Luo Fan through his perception. This pain almost made Luo Fan's mind collapse. His perception dispersed and directly broke away from the imprint. Taking a few deep breaths, Luo Fan forcibly suppressed the pain and understood why it had appeared. It was the aftermath of the saint's imprint resisting the assimilation of the dreamscape that had completely crushed his perception that had come into contact with the imprint. After understanding the reason, with a thought, a faint bright red spread along his perception from his head to the end of his perception. In an instant, his perception was covered in a faint bright red. Impressively, he had added the profound mysteries of the tide of the times that he had comprehended to his perception. The era tide was a supreme existence that could cause the entire universe to undergo earth-shattering changes. Even saints could only sleep and hide in the face of this era tide. One could imagine how powerful it was. Although the little bit of profundity that Luo Fan had comprehended could not be compared to the true trend of the times, it already possessed infinite power. This power added to his perception made it carry a hint of the charm of the era tide, giving it an irresistible, unavoidable, and unshakable characteristic. With this characteristic, his perception was directly covered with the saint's imprint. In an instant, an extreme shock was transmitted to Luo Fan's mind through this perception, making him feel as if the entire world was shaking violently. He felt as if he was completely separated from the outside world. When this feeling appeared, Luo Fan did not panic at all. Instead, he was overjoyed. This was because he understood that the appearance of this feeling was clearly obtained when he had cut himself into the saint's imprint. The feeling of the saint's imprint was just a description. The saint's imprint had no will, wisdom, or spirituality, so it naturally did not feel anything. As he thought about this, his perception changed drastically and gradually started to shake in the same way as the imprint. Although the vibration of the saint's imprint was extremely fast and had even exceeded the limits of the imagination of all living beings, Luo Fan was not an ordinary living being. He was an existence that had attained the Tao integration great success. Such an existence's perception was already indescribably strong. Furthermore, his perception also carried some mysteries of the era tide, which was naturally even more incredible. Therefore, very soon, Luo Fan's perception had synchronized with the vibration of the saint's imprint. At the moment of synchronization, endless light shadows, lines, runes, words, and other inexplicable existences appeared out of nowhere in his mind and mind. At the same time, he felt as if he was surrounded by an existence that could treat him like an ant. In an instant, Luo Fan knew that he had succeeded. The mysteries of the saint's imprint had already started to open its doors to him. What he had to do next was to continuously comprehend those mysteries and constantly seek all the principles that were beneficial to him. After this thought flashed through his mind, he naturally did not hesitate. He completely isolated himself from all other distracting thoughts, and his whole body and mind were immersed in the endless and inexplicable existences that suddenly appeared out of nowhere in his mind and mind. Under such circumstances, everything that was happening in the outside world, and even everything that was happening to his body instantly left him. His perception of time had completely disappeared. In other words, he had no concept of the passage of time at all. The mysteries contained in the saint's imprint were endless, and the depth of it had even exceeded the limits of comprehension for living beings that had not become saints. Therefore, although there were endless mysteries appearing out of nowhere in his mind, what Luo Fan could truly understand and truly receive was still extremely insignificant. Moreover, most of the things that he could understand and receive treated the depths of his memory as a transfer station. They only flowed through his memory once before completely disappearing, as if they had never appeared. This situation was somewhat similar to the situation when he had comprehended the saint's shadow, but it was more serious, and the loss of the principles and mysteries was even greater. However, even so, the principles and mysteries left behind were far more beneficial to him than what he had gained from the saint's shadow. Much, much more. To be continued. Chapter 924. It seemed like only a moment had passed, yet it also seemed like countless years. Luo Fan gradually broke away from the endless mysterious information. When he came back to his senses, he only felt that his whole body was harmonious and comfortable. An incomparably clear and bright feeling emerged from his heart. Every bit of power in his body, every bit of his body, every bit of perception, every bit of his soul, every bit of his mind, was incomparably complete and incomparably comfortable. This kind of perfection and comfort was something that he could not achieve even when he had a breakthrough in his cultivation realm. With a slight thought, he sensed his cultivation realm and found that it was still at the great success realm of Tao integration. It had not improved much compared to before. However, the great success realm of Tao integration at this moment was completely different from before. Back then, he had forcibly relied on his own understanding of the medium success realm of Sage to be to comprehend and study it. Only then did his cultivation realm surpass the barriers and finally reach the great success realm of Tao integration. Such a great success realm of Tao integration was naturally the real great success realm of Tao integration. It was not fake or a great success realm of Tao integration that would disappear after leaving this dream realm. However, it was not a realm that he had advanced from his own understanding of heaven and earth. For him, such a realm was not perfect. In terms of the main body's understanding, he had achieved the great success realm of Tao integration. However, in other aspects, many of the understanding that he should have had was not obtained because the medium success realm of Sage to be did not comprehend it. In other words, the original situation was that although he had achieved the great success realm of Tao integration with the help of the medium success realm of Tao integration, his foundation was not solid. Although it was the real great success realm of Tao integration, it was much weaker than his own great success realm of Tao integration. Moreover, it would be much more difficult for him to make progress in the future. At this moment, the situation was completely different. The mysteries contained in the sage's imprint were endless. It was so profound that even those who had not become sages could not understand it. In order to strengthen the foundation of Luo Fan's great success realm of Tao integration, the mysteries and principles contained in the imprint were naturally more than enough. During this period of time, although Luo Fan could not control what exactly he obtained, the various mysteries instinctively fused with his body, constantly replenishing what he lacked. Finally, at this moment, he had completely solidified his foundation and reached the pinnacle stage of the Tao integration stage. After attaining the greater success stage of the Tao integration realm, the feeling of perfection finally broke through the process of seeking the mysteries and principles of the sage's mark and woke him up. After a brief calculation, Luo Fan noticed that 100,000 years had passed since he stepped into this cave. It's been 100,000 years. It looks like the name I made back then has completely lost its use. Such a thought instantly appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Time was a supreme force in the world. Although Luo Fan had made a name for himself as a master back then, it was only a name he had made after a few thousand years. If he had managed such a name carefully, it would naturally have lasted for a long time and become bigger and bigger, eventually reaching a level that would never be obliterated. However, when this name had just spread, he had cut off all contact with other living beings. How could he manage this name? After 100,000 years, it was unknown how many living beings could still remember his name. After all, this name had been deliberately created by Luo Fan. Although he had already made up his mind, he could not help but feel that it was a pity. He sighed in his heart and released his senses slightly, probing out of the cave. After staying in this cave for 100,000 years, he was already extremely familiar with the aura in this cave. After understanding that the source of all the mysteries in this cave was the sage's imprint, he also had some understanding of the special characteristics of the seal inside and outside the cave. At this moment, with a slight change of his senses, he had already passed through the mysterious barrier at the entrance of the cave, completely grasping the space within a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers. The cave seemed extremely deep, and it took him a long time to walk, but in reality, it was only a few thousand kilometers. With Luo Fan's senses, he could even sense everything within a radius of tens of thousands of light years. Although he was greatly restricted in this dream world, these few thousand kilometers were definitely not his limit. It was precisely because of this that he was able to explore the cave so easily and see the surroundings of the cave entrance. When he saw this, Luo Fan could not help but be slightly taken aback. I never thought that it would be like this. I obtained it without any effort at all. It turned out that Yen Yuan, who he thought had left this place, had not left. She was still guarding outside, and had even directly opened up a rather complete and luxurious cave dwelling around the cave entrance. If that was all, it would only make Luo Fan feel surprised and curious. What made Luo Fan say that he obtained it without any effort at all was the existence of another woman in the cave abode. This woman seemed to be Yen Yuan's elder, and her cultivation realm was even higher than Luo Fan's. She was at least at the peak of the intermediate saint realm, which was equivalent to the perfected Tao integration realm. As soon as he sensed this intermediate saint, Luo Fan felt as if he had seen the center of the entire dream world. There was a mysterious connection in the entire dream realm that even cultivators of the Tao integration realm could not detect. It was connected to the intermediate stage sage-to-be. He could even vaguely sense that the entire dream world was changing along with her breathing, as well as the great Tao of the dream world. This kind of feeling made him instantly understand. This intermediate saint was the intermediate saint who created this dream world. He was also the existence that Luo Fan had painstakingly made a name for himself in order to attract. However, because most of the experts that Luo Fan had seen were male, he had never thought that the intermediate saint who had created this dream world would be a woman. At this moment, he felt that he had obtained it effortlessly, but he also felt an indescribable sense of helplessness. This kind of helplessness, of course, was not because he was in a woman's dream, but because he didn't consider it thoroughly and almost went in the wrong direction. At that time, when he saw Yen Yuan, he felt that Yen Yuan had some kind of connection with the intermediate sage-to-be, but he just thought that she was a confidant. He didn't expect that the intermediate sage-to-be was a woman and that Yen Yuan was her junior. Fellow Taoist, since you have come out of seclusion, why don't you come out and meet me? Just as Luo Fan sensed the intermediate quasi-sage, the intermediate quasi-sage also sensed it. He stopped communicating with Yen Yuan and said softly to the void. The woman's voice was crisp and beautiful, and it had an indescribable appeal. Upon hearing this voice, one would instantly calm down and feel as if one had fallen into a wonderful world. Even Luo Fan could not help but be influenced by her. Luo Fan smiled and said, "Taoist friend, you must know who I am. How should I address you?" The woman's eyes lit up when she heard this. "You are indeed a master. I am Yen Yuan's aunt, Yen Qingqing. I heard that Taoist friend saved you on Er's life, so I have come to thank you." "So it's Taoist Qingqing. It's nothing. How could I trouble fellow Taoists to wait here for so many years? It is really my fault." Luo Fan smiled slightly. However, he had no intention of leaving this place to meet Yen Qingqing. Although it was a little impolite to do so, he still felt that it was more important to stay here and continue to comprehend the mysteries of the sage's imprint. After all, this dreamscape was created by Yan Qingqing. If he were to meet Yan Qingqing, if she wanted to, there might be thousands of accidents that would cause him to be unable to enter this cave anymore. Moreover, he wouldn't be able to comprehend the saint's imprint anymore. If that was the case, he would suffer a huge loss. As for whether Yan Qingqing would leave because of his impoliteness, Luo Fan did not care. It would be best if she wouldn't. When he could no longer comprehend the mysteries of the sage's imprint, he would naturally go out and fight with her. In the end, he would emerge victorious and pass this trial. If she left, it wouldn't matter either. Since he had already contacted her, he would find a way to find her in the future. Then, he would be able to obtain the same result and defeat her. As for the impression that this devastatingly beautiful woman had of him, Luo Fan didn't care at all. He had no intention of taking action, but Yan Qingqing had no intention of stopping. After a pause, she smiled and said, "Did you find anything in the cave? I heard from Tao Wu that this cave allowed him to comprehend the power of calamity. Is that true?" Luo Fan was slightly stunned. He scanned the area with his perception and discovered that Tao Wu was carefully waiting in the distance. Judging from his appearance, although he was not willing to endure hardship, he did not have any hatred. Obviously, he had already submitted to Yan Qingqing. It could be imagined that Yan Qingqing was the person he had been waiting for back then. Luo Fan did not have any intention of monopolizing the sage's imprint. If Yan Qingqing did not ask, he naturally would not ask her to come down and search for it. However, since Yan Qingqing had already asked, he would not hide it from her. Moreover, Yan Qingqing had obviously not just arrived here. She had been waiting here for an unknown period of time. If she still did not step into the cave, it was either that she could not enter or that she was unwilling to disturb him. Regardless of the situation, it did not matter to Luo Fan that it was the sage's imprint. Therefore, Luo Fan only smiled and said, "That's right. I have been comprehending the mysteries of this place all these years, and I have gained a lot from it. If you can pass through the barrier of the cave's aura and come to the depths of the cave, you will definitely gain great benefits." "Oh? So that's how it is. My cultivation has stagnated for billions of years. It would be great if I can make some progress. I wonder if fellow Taoist can allow me to enter and share some of the benefits?" Yan Qingqing's eyes lit up as she said. Luo Fan chuckled and said, "Why do you say that? This place does not belong to me. How can I stop others from entering?" The conversation between Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing was through the exchange of perception. The speed of their conversation was extremely fast. Just now they had exchanged so many words and thoughts, but in reality, it only took a few breaths of time. From the perspective of Yan Yuan, who was beside Yan Qingqing, her aunt only suddenly paused in the middle of the conversation with her. Then, her expression fluctuated for a few breaths before she suddenly smiled sweetly and said to her, "Yuan, your master has already come out of seclusion. Just now, he had a conversation with me. I will now go and explore that cave. You should wait here for now." Yan Yuan's expression changed when she heard this. She said, "Aunt, the aura in the cave is so strange that it is unbearable. If Aunt goes in, won't you be taking a great risk? It's better not to go in." Yan Qingqing faintly smiled. She raised her hand and knocked on Yan Yuan's forehead, then said, "Could it be that you think Aunt's strength is inferior to your master's? He can stay in there for 100,000 years. Do you think I don't even have the right to go and explore?" "That's not what I meant," Yan Yuan said in a wronged manner. All right. If I feel that something is wrong, I will immediately leave the cave. Don't worry." Yan Qingqing looked at Yan Yuan's expression and said helplessly, "Oh." Yan Yuan was still unwilling, but she could only nod her head helplessly. Yan Qingqing stood up with a smile. She took a light step and arrived at the entrance of the cave with a graceful figure. "Qingqing, don't go in. It's very dangerous inside." At this moment Tao Wu was terrified. In a blink of an eye, he had already traversed tens of thousands of miles and arrived at the entrance of the cave, blocking Yan Qingqing's way. Looking at his worried expression, even a blind man could see what he was thinking. Yan Qingqing gently waved her hand and a boundless force pushed Tao Wu back to his original position. She said, "Tao Wu, if you have any improper thoughts, I won't be polite anymore." After saying that, she stepped into the cave. Qingqing. Tao Wu was shocked. He wanted to rush into the cave again, but he found that an invisible potential was still working in his body. It disintegrated all his efforts and made him unable to stand up, let alone rush into the cave. After 100,000 years, BNMO had made some progress compared to before. However, it wasn't a big improvement. He was still in the realm of intermediate stage sage to be. Although it was still a matter of a slap to Luo Fan, he was still an expert. Yan Qingqing's divine ability was even more astonishing than what Luo Fan had imagined. She was able to freeze him in place so easily. However, when he thought that Yan Qingqing was the creator of this world and the whole dreamscape was created by her, he could understand why her divine ability was so shocking. The aura in the cave was emitted by the sage's imprint. The truth contained in it was also a kind of existence that was produced by fighting against the dreamscape. It was precisely because of this that this aura exerted such a strong pressure on all living beings in the dreamscape. However, Yan Qingqing was the only special existence in this dreamscape apart from Luo Fan. She was the only real existence in this dreamscape apart from Luo Fan. Even if she was a part of this dreamscape in her current memories and thoughts, she was the creator of this dreamscape after all. Her nature was completely different from all other existences in this dreamscape. Everything in this dreamscape apart from her was formed by her instincts. To a certain extent, they could be said to be illusory existences. Therefore, they would be affected by the real image contained in the aura and would not be able to get close to the sage's imprint. However, Yan Qingqing was different. She was a completely real existence. To her, this reality was only a part of the dreamscape and had no effect on her nature. As a result, although Yan Qingqing's performance after entering the cave was not as relaxed as Luo Fan's, it was still many times better than Tao Wu's. Very soon, Yan Qingqing had already reached the limit of Tao Wu. She stood there and watched quietly for a while. Then, she nodded and continued to walk forward. Luo Fan saw this process, and an inexplicable thought suddenly emerged in his heart. "It's a pity that I was wrong. I should have stopped her from coming in." Such a thought suddenly flashed across Luo Fan's mind. Unfortunately, he could not do anything about it even if he regretted it now. Yan Qingqing was already halfway there. No matter what Luo Fan said, she could not leave, unless Luo Fan turned hostile and fought her. As Yan Qingqing walked further and further down, she got closer and closer to the sage's imprint. An indescribable light gradually flashed across her eyes. This light seemed to be bewilderment, realization, doubt, and even more so, disbelief. Seeing Yan Qingqing's reaction, Luo Fan knew that it was already too late. He immediately suppressed his thoughts and waited for Yan Qingqing quietly. After a while, Yan Qingqing had already traversed thousands of miles and appeared in front of Luo Fan. At this moment, her figure and appearance were no different from the outside, but there was an indescribable aura added to her body. It was a real aura that was incompatible with the dreamscape. This aura could only be found on Luo Fan in the entire dreamscape. So this is my dreamscape. I didn't expect that I could actually comprehend myself in the dreamscape. Yan Qingqing stood not far away from Luo Fan and looked at the sage's imprint with an indescribable gaze. She said in an incomparably vicissitude tone, "As expected." Luo Fan could not help but sigh. The problem that he was most unwilling to face had finally appeared. To be continued. Chapter 925. Yen Qingqing actually realized that she was in a dreamscape and knew that Luo Fan was an outsider who invaded her dreamscape. This saint's imprint rejects everything in the dreamscape. When Yen Qingqing gets close to this imprint, all of her memories in the dreamscape will be expelled, allowing her to comprehend the truth and know where she is. If I knew this earlier, I would have stopped her from getting close to this place. Luo Fan sighed. May I know how to address you, Taoist? Why have I never seen or heard of you before? Her tone was similar to before, but the meaning behind it was different. Obviously, Yen Qingqing was asking about Luo Fan's true identity at this moment, and not his identity in this dreamscape. My name is Luo Fan. Greetings, Taoist. May I know how to address you? Luo Fan smiled and said, Yen Qingqing is my real name. Yen Qingqing frowned and said, This is my dreamscape. May I know why you are here? It's a long story. Luo Fan sighed. This is my dreamscape. Even if billions of years have passed, the real universe is just a moment of sleep. Yen Qingqing said indifferently. At this moment, she was emitting an awe-inspiring aura. This aura was powerful and vast. It directly oppressed Luo Fan. It was as if she would launch a destructive attack if Luo Fan said anything wrong. Luo Fan was not surprised by Yen Qingqing's behavior. The sudden appearance of another creature in one's dreamscape, and this creature didn't look weak at all. This was a great offense to any creature. It was enough to make any creature do anything. At this moment, Yen Qingqing only had a vigilant expression on her face. She was already extremely restrained. It might be difficult to explain in detail. Let me put it simply. I'm currently participating in a trial set up by an unknown powerhouse. It should be called a trial. I don't know why Taoist Qingqing's dreamscape was chosen by that powerhouse as one of my trials. To put it simply, that's it. Luo Fan said indifferently. Almighty? Trial? Do you think I will believe you? Yen Qingqing said indifferently. This was normal. If it was an ordinary person, they would naturally take it for granted that they were toyed with in their dreams due to the limitations of their strength. But if it was a true expert, especially a quasi-saint like Yen Qingqing, whose strength was beyond imagination and whose control over her own body had reached an extremely deep realm, how could she easily accept the fact that there was an almighty being toying with her dreamscape? Whether this is true or not, I believe that to Taoist Qingqing, it isn't something that is difficult to understand. Luo Fan spread his hands and chuckled. Yen Qingqing looked at Luo Fan's appearance. Her aura surged even more as she charged towards Luo Fan in a frenzy. This kind of aura was unbearable to existences below the intermediate stage of quasi-saint realm, and even to existences like Tao Wu. Just a slight pressure from this aura was enough to kill them and scatter their souls. But to Luo Fan, who had reached the advanced realm of Tao fusing, this kind of aura could only make him feel a little pressure. After all, Luo Fan's advanced realm of Tao fusing had been supplemented by the sage's imprint, and his foundation had already reached an unimaginable level. Almost all the divine sense and means that an advanced realm of Tao fusing should be at his fingertip. Although Yen Qingqing was at the peak of the intermediate stage of quasi-saint realm, and her cultivation realm was a little higher than Luo Fan's, she cultivated by herself. Although her foundation was not lacking, what she had mastered was only a part of the intermediate stage of quasi-saint realm. Under such circumstances, if they really fought, Yen Qingqing might be able to crush Luo Fan by relying on her cultivation realm, which was a little higher than his. However, the pressure from the aura posed a very little threat to him. The innumerable flaws were like countless gaps for him, which could allow him to easily avoid the pressure from the aura. Yen Qingqing could naturally sense that Luo Fan was able to withstand her aura easily, but she did not dare to turn hostile and fight with Luo Fan. Although this was her dreamscape, it was created by her instincts. Although she had all kinds of special privileges in this dreamscape, she still had to abide by the rules and laws of this dreamscape. Under such circumstances, It was impossible for her to be like an ordinary person in a dreamscape, where she could change everything in the dreamscape and become an omnipotent and omniscient existence. Therefore, if she wanted to defeat Luo Fan, she could only rely on her cultivation realm and the power of her own divine sense. However, judging from the current situation, she felt that she didn't have the confidence to defeat Luo Fan, who was in front of her, under the interaction of their auras. Once they started fighting, the shockwave from the battle was enough to destroy the entire dreamland and wake her up. However, this was unacceptable to Yan Qingqing. She stepped into this cave because she sensed that there was something that was extremely beneficial to her in the depths of the cave. Now that she had woken up from her muddle-headed state, it proved how powerful that thing was. Before she completely understood the profoundness of that thing, how could she be willing to give up this dreamland? How could she be willing to break free from this dreamland? According to what you said, that almighty being is at least at the peak of quasi-saint or even sage level. Yan Qingqing slowly withdrew her aura, but she still locked her gaze on Luo Fan and said so. Seeing that Yan Qingqing withdrew her aura, Luo Fan smiled faintly. He knew that Yan Qingqing already believed what he said. I don't know what level that almighty being is at. However, thinking about it, it should be in existence at that level to create such a trial. I don't believe it. In this era, an existence at my level is already close to the strongest in the universe. Even if there are a few who are stronger than me, they are only slightly stronger than me. It's impossible for them to reach that level. Yan Qingqing frowned and said. Although it was a rebuttal, her aura did not oppress Luo Fan this time. Obviously, although it was a rebuttal, she hoped that Luo Fan could find a reason to convince her, and not because she really did not believe it. Luo Fan chuckled and said, Is that really the case? Then what's with this sage's imprint? Could it be that Taoist Qingqing didn't see the sage with her own eyes to form this imprint? This is just an inheritance from my sect. I have never seen a sage before. Yan Qingqing glanced at the sage's imprint and said in an indescribable tone. There was an indescribable melancholy in her tone, as well as an indescribable feeling of vicissitude. Oh, I see. Luo Fan came to a sudden realization after hearing that. However, he was also a little disappointed. If he could seize the sage's imprint from the time god's memory, then the other cultivators would naturally be able to think of a way to pass on the sage's imprint. It was not surprising that the sage's imprint could be passed down from generation to generation. However, this meant that his previous guesses that Yan Qingqing was from the sage era, or was simply a living being from the age of chaos, were completely wrong. This Yan Qingqing could be a living being from any era. I see. What do you mean? Yan Qingqing frowned and said discontentedly. At this moment, her aura was already quite restrained. Her frowning and discontented tone showed an indescribable beauty. It was enough to attract people's attention. Facing such a beautiful scene, Luo Fan did not pay much attention. His expression did not even change a little. It's just a guess of mine. When I saw this imprint, I was still guessing which era Taoist Qingqing was from. I was quite sure at first, but now it seems that I am ignorant and inexperienced, Luo Fan said with a smile. You're guessing which era I'm from? Aren't you a cultivator from the Divine Array era? That's right, you're definitely not from the era of divine formations. Otherwise, as a quasi-sage, there's no way I wouldn't know of the existence of another quasi-sage. I should have thought of it earlier. Yan Qingqing's expression changed drastically as she muttered. At the end of her murmur, her eyes suddenly emitted boundless light. That light contained an indescribable hope. In an instant, her body had already traversed a distance of several dozen feet, arriving directly in front of Luo Fan. She opened her hands and patted Luo Fan's shoulders. This speed was extremely fast. Luo Fan immediately discovered that Yan Qingqing's movements didn't have any killing intent, nor did she have any hostility. He knew that Yan Qingqing might have grabbed his shoulder out of pure excitement. However, it was obviously impossible for him to entrust his life to the other party's whim. Even if he was quite confident that Yan Qingqing's slap wouldn't hurt him, he still couldn't help it. However, he didn't intend to stay where he was and wait for her hands. With a slight thought, he took a step back and easily dodged Yan Qingqing's tens of thousands of divine sense changes instinctively, causing Yan Qingqing's slap to miss its target. Yan Qingqing was slightly stunned. She looked at Luo Fan with a slightly different expression. However, the excitement on his face had lessened by a lot. Obviously, she knew that although she was too excited and didn't have complete control over her slap, it was impossible for an ordinary existence at the peak of the intermediate stage of Sage to Be to dodge it. However, this intermediate stage Sage to Be, who was far from reaching the peak of the intermediate stage of Sage to Be, dodged it so easily and freely. This allowed her to have a deeper understanding of Luo Fan's strength. Naturally, she suppressed the overly excited emotions in her heart. However, although she suppressed her emotions, she was still eager and the hope in her eyes was still strong. Since you're not a sage to be of the divine formation era, why are you able to appear in my dream? Could it be that you have some way to transcend the shackles of this era and not be affected by the power of calamity? Yan Qingqing asked urgently. Luo Fan looked at Yan Qingqing with a faint smile, but he didn't answer her question. Yan Qingqing fixed her eyes on Luo Fan. The hope in her eyes faded away gradually and finally disappeared completely. She let out a long sigh and said, "I've thought too much. You've already said that you appeared in my dream after participating in some kind of trial. The one who can transcend the shackles of the era and not be affected by the destructive force is obviously not you, but the Almighty behind you. Perhaps, even that Almighty can't be unaffected by the destructive force you mentioned. He can only do it with the help of some kind of medium. After all, a sage can only sleep for countless years under the destructive force." Yan Qingqing overthrew her own thoughts and sighed. During this process, Luo Fan didn't speak out of turn. He didn't confirm Yan Qingqing's statement, nor did he refute her statement. Some things would naturally be noticed when one reached a certain level. Whether he said it or not, as long as Yan Qingqing pondered for a while, she would get the same answer as him. There was no need for him to say anything. Moreover, if he said it out of turn, it might arouse Yan Qingqing's rebellious thoughts. She might start to refute him one by one. Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? "So you're guessing which era I'm a sage to be?" Yan Qingqing sighed and asked. Obviously, she had completely calmed down. Of course, he was still curious about it. Just like how a fish in the water would be curious about the feeling of a bird in the sky. This wasn't something that couldn't be said. Luo Fan naturally said it without a care. "I thought you're a sage to be from the Sage Era or the Age of Chaos." Sage Era? Age of Chaos? Yan Qingqing's expression changed greatly when she heard this. Don't tell me that there's actually an Age of Sage in this universe? Didn't the saints fall into a deep slumber that they would never wake up from before the dawn of the era? How could there still be an Age of Sage? Moreover, you guessed it to be the Age of Chaos. Don't tell me there's also an Age of Chaos? Yan Qingqing asked a series of questions. Luo Fan only shook his head and said, "You're asking me, but you're asking the blind. My cultivation is inferior to yours, how would I know about these things?" Yan Qingqing's expression was slightly sluggish. She stood there, no one knew what she was thinking. Unknowingly, Yan Qingqing had already let go of that initial question. Why would Luo Fan appear in her dream? Her relationship with Luo Fan had also unknowingly become less hostile. It had even become somewhat friendly. Yan Qingqing paused for dozens of breaths. Then, she let out a long sigh and said, "Qingqing has been impolite." Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "It's my impoliteness to intrude into Taoist Qingqing's dream." Yan Qingqing smiled bitterly and said, "I've already thought it through. The reason why I can have this dream is because Taoist Qingqing wants to participate in that trial. Otherwise, How could I suddenly have such a realistic dream, and create such a grand dream world, since I haven't had a dream for hundreds of millions of years since I refined the first formation? Moreover, this is also a great opportunity for me. Yan Qingqing paused for a while, and turned to look at the sage's imprint. There was a hint of joy in her expression. Seeing Yan Qingqing's expression and words, Luo Fan was finally completely relieved. He originally planned to tell Yan Qingqing about the existence of this dream world because of him, or in other words because of the transcendence path. At this moment, he had already confirmed that the path formed by 9,999 checkpoints was the transcendence path and not just the path of convergence. Now that Yan Qingqing had realized this herself, it saved him a lot of effort. He also didn't have to worry that she wouldn't believe it out of conceit. When Luo Fan was completely relieved, Yan Qingqing smiled sweetly and said, Taoist Qingqing has always been very worried that I would turn hostile and attack you. How can I not be worried? Seeing her teasing expression, Luo Fan did not mind at all and admitted, This is your dream world after all. Taoist Qingqing's ability is also stronger than mine. If we fight, I won't be able to survive. Other than fearless fools, I'm afraid anyone would be worried. Yan Qingqing didn't expect Luo Fan to admit it so calmly. She couldn't help but look at Luo Fan with admiration. To be able to admit his worry and fear so calmly, it at least showed that this person's Tao heart was sufficiently complete. He was also sufficiently confident. It's been hundreds of millions of years. Ever since I received this sage's imprint, I've obtained a bit of the profoundness contained within it. Although I knew that there was such a precious treasure in my body, I never found a way to understand its profoundness. I didn't expect that I would finally be able to truly understand this imprint today. Patriarchs, disciple finally has the chance to fulfill the long-cherished wish of the sect today. Yan Qingqing turned her head and looked at the sage's imprint for a while. Suddenly, 2 streams of tears flowed down from the corners of her eyes. When Luo Fan heard Yan Qingqing's sigh, he also felt a sense of vicissitudes of life and disappointment. A sage's imprint had been passed down for countless eras and generations. Every inheritor knew that it was a priceless treasure that contained infinite principles. If one could understand the profoundness within it, he would be able to obtain supreme divine power and unparalleled cultivation. However, no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't be able to obtain any benefit from it. This kind of pain was enough to make the inheritor feel extreme pain after 2 or 3 generations. Not to mention that it had been passed down for countless eras. That kind of vicissitudes, that kind of pressure, that kind of pain, it was imaginable how shocking it was. He didn't feel that Yan Qingqing's current behavior was incomprehensible to him at all. Sighing slightly, Luo Fan didn't say anything else. He floated up and sat cross-legged in the air, as if he was sitting on an empty stone platform. As he released his perception, it enveloped the sage's imprint and began to produce the same vibration as before. He began to comprehend the profoundness of the sage's imprint. As for what Yan Qingqing was going to do, as long as she dispelled the thought of dealing with him, Luo Fan was too lazy to care. To be continued. Chapter 926. Yan Qingqing couldn't help but smile bitterly when she saw how Luo Fan treated this place as his home. Moreover, this saint's imprint had been passed down through countless generations in her sect. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was a priceless treasure in her sect. Normally speaking, not to mention someone comprehending it in front of her, even a little inquiring about it would trigger a violent reaction from her and make her teach that person a lesson. However, at this moment, seeing how Luo Fan behaved, she couldn't say anything at all. This was because this dream of hers only appeared because Luo Fan was going to participate in that damned trial. In other words, if she wanted to use this dream to comprehend the mysteries of the saint's imprint, she couldn't expel Luo Fan from it. She had to let Luo Fan continue his trial. Evidently, Luo Fan's trial seemed to be obtained from this saint's imprint. Although Yan Qingqing was very unhappy with this thought, She could only forcefully swallow her anger. She turned her head and looked at the saint's imprint, pretending that she didn't see Luo Fan. Yan Qingqing's method of comprehending the mysteries of the saint's imprint was naturally different from Luo Fan's. She didn't use her perception, but two faint red rays of light were emitted from her eyes. The faint red on the rays of light was quite different from normal red. It seemed to be close to the bright red of the times. Obviously, although her sect hadn't obtained any benefits from the saint's imprint for hundreds of millions of years, in reality, the harvest of countless generations was gathered in one place. The benefits were not small. At the very least, it allowed her to obtain a divine ability that was somewhat similar to the power of calamity. The two rays of light directly penetrated Luo Fan's perception and suddenly poured into the saint's imprint that was floating in the air. Following this change, the saint's imprint suddenly shook, and the change became more and more intense. As if it had met its master or enemy, it became more active. During this process, endless information was crazily poured into Yan Qingqing's mind through those two rays of light. It turned into countless mysteries that Yan Qingqing could understand and couldn't understand, and continuously merged into the depths of her memory. Although Yan Qingqing was an existence that had reached the peak of quasi-sage, and her cultivation realm was even higher than Luo Fan, who had reached the great accomplishment of Dao fusing, but because she was cultivating on her own, even if she had some inheritance, it would still lean towards a single path. Therefore, even though her foundation wasn't unstable, it wasn't as solid as Luo Fan's. There was still a lot of room for improvement. Under such circumstances, the endless information from the saint's imprints poured into her body like mercury, continuously nourishing all of her comprehension and the various mysteries she had mastered in each realm. In an unimaginable way, it began to recast her baseband. For Luo Fan, when his perception resonated with the saint's branding valley with the bright red light, endless mysteries naturally emerged from his mind. These principles, these mysteries, even though the depths of his memory were like a transit station, most of them flashed by. However, those mysteries that were left behind were already like a high mountain to him, allowing his cultivation realm to increase at a speed that he could feel little by little. His perception of the flow of time quickly left him. In a trance, he didn't know how much time had passed. Luo Fan suddenly felt an extremely vast aura impact him, causing him to return from the state where he had completely lost his perception of time. His heart shook and he suddenly opened his eyes, looking at the source of that aura. However, that aura was emitted by Yan Qingqing. At this moment, Yan Qingqing was floating in the air. Both of her hands were stretched out behind her back, and her head was slightly raised up. Her entire body seemed to be lifted up by a huge force. The aura on her body was rolling out like waves, diffusing into the entire cave, causing the aura of the saint's imprint in the depths of the cave to disperse. An inexplicable red light was gradually emitted from her body. This kind of red light was extremely dense. It was countless times denser than the scattered light that was emitted from her eyes. Moreover, compared to the scattered light from before, this kind of red had a brighter charm. In other words, the difference between this kind of red and the real bright red had become smaller. Seeing Yan Qingqing's reaction, Luo Fan knew that she had gained a lot. Although it was said that breaking through to the great perfection of quasi-saint realm was not a big deal, at least the benefits that she had gained would not be less than the previous time. In other words, at this moment, Yan Qingqing might have already eliminated the flaws and imperfections that were left in her previous cultivation. At this moment, her body was perfect, and her mind was incomparably clear. This incomparably powerful aura contained this kind of incomparably abundant aura, which shook Luo Fan's mind and made him feel that he was also deeply affected by it. This kind of feeling of perfection was extremely contagious. During this period of time, although Luo Fan had comprehended the endless mysteries contained within the saint's imprint, due to the limitations of his own realm, the amount of mysteries and principles that were truly left behind from the saint's imprint was extremely little. It was so little that, at this moment, his cultivation realm had only improved a little compared to before. However, he was still in the great perfection of Tao integration and had not even reached the peak of the great perfection of Tao integration. The reason for this was mysterious, but it was actually very simple. It was because the gap between Luo Fan and the sage's imprint was really too big. The mysteries contained in the imprint were originally impossible for him to comprehend. Under such circumstances, even if he used all kinds of special methods to let those mysteries enter his mind and into the depths of his memory, those mysteries and principles could only be retained by him, except for some that he should have grasped but had not grasped. In other words, those mysteries that he lacked before his cultivation realm could be retained by him. Therefore, when his foundation was not solid enough, and there were still many flaws in his cultivation realm, those principles could be retained in the depths of his memory. However, when he had eliminated all the flaws and omissions, those principles that he could understand had already been obtained by him, and those that he could not understand would not be retained in his memory. That was the reason why such a situation had occurred. In fact, at this moment it had been 1,000,000 years since the conversation between Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing. However, in these 1,000,000 years, his harvest was tens of thousands of times less than what he had gained in the past 100,000 years. Under such circumstances, he suddenly felt the perfect aura that was equivalent to the Tao integration peak perfection stage from Yan Qingqing's body. His entire mind seemed to have obtained an indescribable sublimation in an instant. All of a sudden, there was a supreme thought that wrapped around him, and a feeling of climbing to an unimaginable height arose spontaneously in him. Under such a feeling, he suddenly felt that the various principles and mysteries that he could not understand before had become so simple and clear. He even had a feeling that he was so stupid in the past that he could not even understand such simple principles clearly. In such a process, his cultivation realm was rising at an indescribable speed. In a trance, he felt that he had already come into contact with a layer of strange barrier. This barrier was extremely tough, and it was like a huge dam blocking in front of him. It suddenly stopped his cultivation realm, which seemed to be a smooth journey. It caused his cultivation realm to directly stagnate at a height that was many times stronger than before, but it still did not obtain a sublimation in essence. It could still be considered to be at the same level as before. After sensing slightly, Luo Fan realized that the change just now had actually raised his cultivation realm to the Tao integration peak perfection stage. It was only a tiny bit away from Tao integration peak perfection stage. It seemed that as long as he had a little bit of comprehension and comprehended some insignificant key points, his cultivation realm could break through to the Tao integration peak perfection stage. However, Luo Fan was very clear that this was just an illusion. This was how the cultivation realm was. It seemed that he only needed a little bit of comprehension to break through, but if he really did it, he might need to expend more energy than the sum of all the energy he had used to cultivate from nothing to this realm to finally complete this kind of breakthrough. Of course, Luo Fan was already satisfied with such progress at this moment. Even though he still had more expectations, he did not really regard it as a gain that he had to obtain and would not be willing to accept if he could not obtain it. Instead, it was naturally the best if he could obtain it, but it did not matter if he could not obtain it. After completing such progress, even with Luo Fan's firm mind, he could not help but feel a little strange. After all, when he had first entered this dream realm, he had only just entered the Tao integration realm. At this moment, he had already walked 3 realms in the Tao integration realm. From just entering to the Tao integration peak perfection stage, he was only a step away from Tao integration peak perfection stage. Such a huge gain was so huge that it almost made him feel like he was in a dream. However, he reacted very quickly. He could feel that the various profound principles transmitted from the saint's imprint had instead remained in his mind due to the increase in his cultivation realm. He did not know how many times more of them remained in his mind than before. Such a growth speed had made up for the various flaws that remained after his cultivation realm had improved at an unimaginable speed. Although it could not improve his cultivation realm, it allowed him to grasp all the mysteries that could be grasped at the peak of the Tao integration realm, so that he could reach the pinnacle of the Tao integration pinnacle stage. Because he had already accumulated for such a long time, the process of making up for it was many times faster than before. In just a short 10 years, he had completed this process. When he defeated one, with a slight thought, he felt two pairs of eyes staring at him. He turned around and saw Yan Qingqing looking at him with an inexplicable expression. "I didn't expect you to make such a huge progress again. This is really beyond my expectations." Seeing that Luo Fan was awake, Yan Qingqing sighed and said. Obviously, she had also felt the different performance of the saint's imprint before and after. At this moment, she was affected by the perfection aura that Luo Fan emitted and finally saw the huge progress he had made. Therefore, she felt helpless. She felt helpless about not being able to gain more benefits, but Luo Fan could make such a huge breakthrough. Luo Fan smiled bitterly and said, "Taoist Qingqing, you're thinking too much. I only managed to break through because of the aura of fellow cultivator Qingqing when she completed her saint imprint. However, I only managed to make up for it a little bit." Hearing this, Yan Qingqing was surprised. Then, she revealed a disappointed expression and sighed. "I originally thought that with such a rare opportunity, I would be able to become a great completion quasi-sage. I didn't expect that in the end, I only made a solid foundation." Seeing Yan Qingqing's expression, Luo Fan said, "Making a solid foundation is already an extremely rare harvest. With such a solid foundation, the difficulty of Taoist Qingqing's self-cultivation in the future will be reduced by hundreds or thousands of times. This is already enviable. Be that as it may, if I want to break through in my cultivation, I need to leave this dreamscape world. Leaving this dreamscape world is equivalent to passing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm afraid the next time I have the chance to comprehend this saint's imprint will be a long time coming." Yan Qingqing was still sighing endlessly. Naturally, Luo Fan understood what she meant, because this was also what he felt helpless about. No matter how long he stayed in this dreamscape, it was equivalent to Yan Qingqing sleeping in the outside world. It could be said that there was no end to it. From this point of view, this was naturally an extremely wonderful place for cultivation. It was even more perfect than those worlds and heavenly grottos that he had opened up. However, this dreamscape, from another point of view, was not suitable for Yan Qingqing to cultivate at all. This was because the entire dreamscape was created by Yan Qingqing instinctively. All the rules, laws, principles, living beings, and all the mysteries were known and understood by Yan Qingqing. Under such circumstances, cultivating in this dreamscape was equivalent to cultivating in an empty space. It was impossible to comprehend the mysteries of heaven and earth and the principles of the great Tao. Under such circumstances, it was basically impossible for her to improve her cultivation in this dream world unless she cultivated some divine abilities that required her to spend a long time to deduce them. As for Luo Fan, although he could obtain Yan Qingqing's various understandings through comprehending everything in this dreamscape, he could use these understandings to improve his cultivation realm. However, this was like Yan Qingqing exposing everything about herself in front of Luo Fan. If Yan Qingqing wasn't here, he could still do this. However, Yan Qingqing was right beside him and she had already comprehended everything. How could she allow Luo Fan to do this? How could she allow Luo Fan to comprehend her dreamscape at will? Therefore, it could be said that when the sage's imprint was no longer beneficial to Yan Qingqing, and when her cultivation in this dreamscape would not allow her to improve further, it would be the time when the friendly relationship between Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing would end. As expected, after Yan Qingqing lamented, she said to Luo Fan, "If you want to pass this trial, you must kill me, right?" Yan Qingqing and Luo Fan had a tacit understanding not to mention what Luo Fan needed to do in order to pass this checkpoint and achieve what he needed to achieve. The reason was, of course, not because both of them had forgotten this point. It was because they both knew that this request was the fundamental contradiction between Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing. If they did not do it, they could still maintain their fragile friendly relationship. However, if they were to say it out loud, it would probably push them into a position where they could not coexist. From then on, the two of them would no longer have the chance to comprehend the saint's imprint that had already opened the door to them, allowing them to do as they pleased. Yan Qingqing was very clear that the trial was definitely not a vacation. When that almighty being threw Luo Fan into the dreamscape, it was definitely not to let him wander around and comprehend for a while before letting him pass the trial. If Yan Qingqing were to set up such a trial, she would definitely not make such a choice. Since it was not a vacation, then Luo Fan's goal in entering the dreamscape was also very obvious. That was to fight. It could be a battle with some existences in the dreamscape, or a battle with the master of this dreamscape. And obviously, the most likely target was the master of this dreamscape. It was precisely because she understood this point that Yan Qingqing deliberately did not mention this point and only pretended that she did not think of it. It was also because of this that Luo Fan pretended to not think of it just like Yan Qingqing. As for why Yan Qingqing would mention this fundamental contradiction between the two of them, it was obviously because she felt that since there was no need to continue staying in the dreamscape, there was no need for her to endure any more grievances. Hearing Yan Qingqing's words, Luo Fan sighed. He understood that this moment had finally arrived. He sighed, "You can say it like that. But to be more precise, I have to defeat you and break this dreamscape. There is no difference between the two. If you want to defeat me, there is no other way but to kill me," Yan Qingqing said indifferently. An incomparably powerful killing intent surged out from her body, condensing into a black screen that pressed towards Luo Fan. Chapter 180. Reclaiming and Falling Out. Chapter 927. Seal of the Era. Chapter 967. Seal of the Era. In the face of such a terrifying killing intent, Luo Fan's expression turned solemn. Knowing that words were no longer of any use, he swayed his body and the surrounding aura surged. Then, he frantically collided with the attacking killing intent. With a loud bang, the cave suddenly expanded by tens of thousands of times. From a cave that was originally only a few meters in size, it became an underground space with a circumference of tens of thousands of meters. The shock wave produced by the collision between the aura released by Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing's killing intent produced an unimaginable explosive force, which directly expanded the deep underground cave. However, such a collision of aura still did not affect the sage's seal that was suspended in the depths of the cave. The sage's seal seemed as if nothing had happened around it. The cave was still the same as before, quietly suspended in the center of the underground space, emitting an extremely powerful aura that filled the underground space. This aura was no different from before. The aura in the cave outside the underground space also did not change. It seemed that the change in the size of the space had no effect on the aura produced by the sage's seal. The impact of this collision on the surrounding environment was so shocking. However, for Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing, the consequences were just ordinary. Although the aura released by Luo Fan had reached the strongest realm that he could release, he was only at the peak of the profound realm of Tao integration after all. There was still a small realm difference between him and Yan Qingqing, who was at the peak of the intermediate realm of sage-to-be. This absolute gap made it impossible for him to completely offset his killing intent for Yan Qingqing. Under the collision, his face turned slightly pale and he could not help but take a step back. At this moment, Yan Qingqing's eyes were burning and her beautiful face was full of frost. Although she had the upper hand in the collision between the aura and the killing intent, she only did not retreat. Her face also turned slightly pale. However, the upper hand was the upper hand after all. Yan Qingqing's recovery speed was much faster than that of Luo Fan. In less than a moment, her face returned to normal. She raised her hand and gently drew a line in the void. In the blink of an eye, countless strange runes and lines flashed across the void. Then, a strange three-dimensional ball formed by countless strange runes and lines suddenly appeared in front of her. After the sphere appeared, it trembled slightly and arrived around Luo Fan. It expanded dozens of times and became a sphere with a diameter of 100 feet. It wrapped around Luo Fan. Luo Fan was wrapped in this ball. Although the world in his eyes didn't change, he still saw the various scenes in this underground space. The ball formed by runes and lines was still in his eyes. However, he felt as if he had fallen into another space. It was an extremely strange space that rejected him and made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Facing this space, millions of powers gushed out of Luo Fan's body with a thought. They formed a clear cloud above his head. It surged and trembled slightly, producing a strange power that resisted the various strange erosion of his body caused by the ball. When the auspicious cloud blocked the corrosion, it sank slightly, almost touching his head. This cloud was the power combination that Luo Fan had comprehended when he was in the void comprehension realm after he reached the great success realm of Tao integration. It was a power combination that was improved and sublimated from the power combination formed by hundreds of thousands of powers. The power of the divine ability was similar to that of the past, but it was much stronger. The ball that wrapped around him was naturally Yan Qingqing's specialty. It was an extremely exquisite formation that possessed extremely unimaginable power. The fact that the auspicious cloud could resist the formation's erosion and protect him was enough to show how much stronger this power combination was compared to before. It should be noted that when the auspicious cloud was still at the void comprehension realm, it had no ability to resist the power of the Tao integration realm. Now that he had improved it to the great success realm of Tao integration, the opponent he faced was a powerful existence that was a small realm stronger than him. Yan Qingqing's expression didn't change at all when she saw the power of the clear cloud. She wasn't arrogant enough to think that she could easily destroy an intermediate sage-to-be who was only a small realm weaker than her with a casual move. It was normal that Luo Fan could resist her formation. If she had defeated Luo Fan in one move, she would have been surprised instead. As these thoughts flashed through her mind, Yan Qingqing raised her hand and drew a very mysterious trajectory in the void. Following her movements, the runes and lines on the sphere began to change crazily. In an instant, a blood-red light flashed in the sphere and condensed. In the end, it turned into a huge but slender palm that was quite similar to Yan Qingqing's own body. This palm was extremely solid, and the veined patterns on it were striking. It looked like a real palm. After the palm took shape, it directly slapped the clear cloud above Luo Fan's head. As soon as Luo Fan saw this palm, he felt that the blood-red color on the palm had evolved from bright red. In other words, it had used a different method to come into contact with the bright red light. Such a light obviously couldn't be said to have obtained the mysteries of the time's trend, but it was close to being able to exert unimaginable power. Although he was confident in this cloud and believed that it could at least withstand a perfected Tao integration realm attack, he didn't have much confidence in this attack that was close to some of the mysteries of the time's trend. With a slight thought, the cloud condensed into a similarly huge palm and slapped the blood-red palm, which was like an enlarged version of Yan Qingqing's palm. The palm condensed by the cloud was about half the size of the blood-red palm, but it was more than twice as solid as the blood-red palm. Of course, this was not because Luo Fan's control over the palm condensed by power was stronger, but because Luo Fan cultivated the strength Tao. All the power of the cloud was directly extracted from his body, so it was naturally closely related to him. Hence, it was very easy for him to control it. The blood-red palm condensed by Yan Qingqing was condensed by an array formation. Even though the array formation was condensed by her own power, there was still a layer between them. Her control over the palm condensed by the array formation was naturally weaker than that of Luo Fan. The two huge palms directly collided. During the entire process, Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing each used their own means. The palm condensed by Yan Qingqing produced millions of changes, showing her extremely profound battle wisdom. She wanted to bypass Luo Fan's palm condensed by the cloud and directly hit Luo Fan. On the other hand, Luo Fan also displayed his incomparably astonishing martial arts attainments to the fullest. No matter how many changes the palm had, no matter how much Yan Qingqing displayed her battle wisdom, she firmly controlled the direction of its advance and blocked the palm. In the end, the palm could only forcefully collide with the palm condensed from the auspicious clouds. The consequences of this collision were earth-shattering. In an instant, the void shattered and time was cut off. The surrounding lights and shadows fluctuated, and countless spatial powder condensed into endless strange lights and shadows that surrounded Luo Fan's body. It was unknown how many strange and bizarre scenes were evolving. The palm condensed by the cloud condensed by Luo Fan had completely collapsed in the collision, directly smashed by the blood-red palm. Even though the blood-red palm had suffered great damage and seemed to have become extremely tattered, with only 3 fingers remaining, it had still obtained an absolute victory. It smashed through everything in front of it and all the power that was protecting Luo Fan, and continued to press down on Luo Fan. The countless light and shadow formed by the countless spatial powder that formed around Luo Fan were none other than the various mysterious scenes that were reflected by the different time and space after the collision broke and became chaotic. It could also be said that they were some images of the past, present, or future of this dream world. When the blood-red palm passed by, these images began to attach to the blood-red palm in an extremely strange way, and began to reconstruct and combine in an indescribable way, forming an indescribable order. This process was so mysterious that it made Luo Fan's eyes reveal a kind of astonishment. For Yan Qingqing, this kind of process might only be a kind of meaningless special phenomenon that was naturally produced by her own magical ability. However, for Luo Fan, this represented that among the various mysteries contained in the blood-red, the proportion of the mysteries of the tide of the times was much more than he had imagined. It was also much stronger. Facing such an attack, how could Luo Fan dare to hold back? With a thought, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. A faint bright red seal appeared out of thin air in front of him. This seal was formed by the combination of dozens of powers. Although it was not a small amount, it was so insignificant compared to the auspicious cloud that was formed by millions of powers. The seal that was formed by dozens of powers was extremely solid. There was no trace of it being formed by power at all. It was as if it was carved by some kind of strange ore. The entire seal looked extremely simple and unadorned. Every turn, every line, and every rise and fall on it were so perfect and exquisite. On the front of the seal, there were 2 incomparably ancient and incomparably complicated words. Era. After the seal appeared, it directly turned and imprinted on the blood-red palm that had already become broken. Yan Qingqing saw all of this and suddenly felt an indescribable sense of danger. She instantly understood that the power of this move of Luo Fan's would be extremely shocking. With a thought, the formation that enveloped Luo Fan suddenly turned and suddenly emitted an incomparably bright light. The countless strange runes and lines on it began to move crazily at an unimaginable speed. Obviously, the power of the entire formation had been exerted to the limit. When this change occurred, The blood-red palm that was originally broken after colliding with the palm formed by Luo Fan's auspicious cloud began to be repaired at an unimaginable speed. When Luo Fan's seal touched the palm, the broken palm that originally only had 3 fingers left had already become whole again. There was no trace of damage at all. Facing such a change, Luo Fan's expression became even more serious, but he did not use any more techniques. It was not that he did not want to, but he knew that the substitution seal was already the most powerful attack that he could use at this moment. Unless he had more time to recultivate the divine ability that was imbued with the mysteries of the Aratide, it was impossible for him to use the divine ability that was helpful to the seal. Moreover, if he forcefully used it, it might even interfere with the seal and affect it, causing the power of the substitution seal to weaken. It would be self-defeating. Therefore, although he knew that Yan Qingqing had already greatly increased the power of the palm, he could only bite the bullet and continue to imprint the substitution seal on the blood-red palm. The seal was found by Luo Fan according to the mysteries of the Aratide that he had grasped and his various powers. It was a combination of powers that could fully display the mysteries of the Aratide. Of course, he did not have too much time to comprehend this combination of powers. At this moment, this seal was just something he had deduced in a split second. It was still far from being perfect. That was why it was a combination of dozens of powers, and not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of powers. However, even so, this seal was still the most powerful attack that he could use at this moment. The instant the seal came into contact with the palm, an indescribable impact burst out from the point of contact in all directions. This impact was not the kind of shock wave produced by an ordinary explosion. It was an incomparably mysterious and strange impact. Under this impact, what was produced was not destruction, but a kind of reincarnation. The surrounding time and space that had been shattered into countless pieces started to reform and condense into a normal space-time. Or it should be said that it was normal for the normal Earth universe, but it was incomparably absurd for this dreamscape. Even the cave, the ground, where Yan Qingqing was, and the surrounding formation had completely turned into a space-time that was completely different from the dreamscape. It was almost the same as the real universe. Within the range of the impact, apart from Luo Fan, the substitution seal, the blood-red palm, the surrounding broken formation, Yan Qingqing, and the saint's imprint, everything else turned into nothingness. In other words, it was completely covered by the normal, real space-time. Whether it was the surrounding land or the various auras in the cave, everything was no exception. From the looks of it, it was as if a huge space-time hole was expanding and devouring everything in its surroundings. This entire transformation process was incomparably fast. If it wasn't for Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing's cultivation realm being extremely high and their eyesight and perception being extremely shocking, they might not even be able to see the process of the impact spreading. They could only see the huge change in their surroundings in a flash. The impact spread over an extremely wide area. In the blink of an eye, it spread out from the ground and spread across the entire dreamscape. Yen Yuan and Tao Wu, who were at the entrance of the cave, the desolate mountain range, the countless living beings in the mountain range, the sky, the clouds, everything disappeared without a trace after the impact, as if they were never there. Fortunately, this place was located in the desolate and was extremely far away from the core of the dreamscape. Hence, even if the impact spread to its limits, it only slightly touched 1 or 2 cities at the edge of the core of the dreamscape. It did not directly turn the entire dreamscape into a real space-time. If that was the case, it would be equivalent to the dreamscape being completely destroyed. Yan Qingqing would naturally not be able to stay here any longer, and would directly wake up. Luo Fan would also be equivalent to passing the 9991st stage. At this moment, the impact's range turned into a real spacetime, but it was only the first stage of the reincarnation transformation. After the surrounding spacetime turned into a real spacetime, and everything that was produced in the dreamscape was erased, another wave of impact spread out. This time, the impact completely twisted all space-time within its range into powder, and finally turned into nothingness. Whether it was time, space, matter, energy, or any other tangible or intangible existence, they were all turned into powder by this second wave of impact, and then turned into nothingness. The range of this impact was no different from the ripples that created a real space-time. Similarly, it affected a few cities at the edge of the core of the dreamscape. Then, another wave of impact was produced at the point of collision, and recreated space-time. Just like that, one wave of impact after another was produced. These impacts were a kind of creation and a kind of destruction. They alternated like this, and the surrounding space-time was like rubbing plasticine and playing with it crazily. After all, this impact was produced by the collision, and naturally followed the law of impact wave. Each wave was smaller than the previous, and after a few breaths, the impact wave completely disappeared. Around Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing, there was only a spherical spacetime with a circumference of several dozen miles. The reason why such a spacetime existed was because of the existence of the saint's imprint. Outside of this spacetime, there was an incomparably strange nothingness. There wasn't even time or space in the void. The faint bright red era imprint that Luo Fan condensed shook, and suddenly became incomparably illusory. It no longer looked solid, as if it was a shadow that could disappear at any time. The huge palm that was locked in a stalemate with the era imprint, along with the formation that condensed the palm, directly collapsed, and turned into fine powder that dispersed in all directions like smoke. In the end, it melted into the void and disappeared without a trace. The power of calamity you unleashed is actually purer than mine, Yan Qingqing said in an inexplicable tone. Chapter 928. Looking at the current situation, it was clear that the collision just now had not only dispersed Yan Qingqing's blood-red palm that was slapping towards Luo Fan, but the power had also been transmitted back and destroyed Yan Qingqing's body. As a result, Yan Qingqing's incarnation in the dreamland world gradually collapsed and disappeared. The reason behind this might seem inconceivable, but it was actually quite simple. Because Luo Fan's understanding of the era trend was purer than Yan Qingqing's. He understood the essence of the era trend better and knew what kind of existence the era trend was. This could be seen from the fact that he knew that it was the era trend's profundity, but Yan Qingqing only thought that it was the power of calamity. The era trend was an absolute existence that even sages couldn't resist. No matter how one tried to imagine or overestimate the profundities of such existences, they would only be underestimating the profundities of such existences. In this way, the more one understood the essence of the era trend, the more powerful the power that could be exerted would be. If Yan Qingqing's strength was a realm higher than Luo Fan's, for example, she had already stepped into the great mastery of Sage to Be, which was equivalent to the transcendent realm. The difference in understanding the essence of the era trend wouldn't be able to close such a huge gap of tens of thousands of times. However, at this moment, the gap between Luo Fan and Yan Qingqing was only a small realm. There wasn't much difference in their essence. Under such circumstances, this gap in the mysteries of the era tide naturally played a crucial role. It allowed Luo Fan to rely on the imperfect era seal, which had countless flaws, to disperse the most powerful offensive formation that Yan Qingqing had cast. Then, he transmitted its power over and directly dispersed the essence of Yan Qingqing's existence. Before Yan Qingqing could finish her words, her figure flashed and disappeared without a trace. However, this kind of disappearance didn't mean that she had completely collapsed and perished. Instead, it seemed to have happened in an instant. She had moved the spacetime in an unimaginable way, as if she had left this spacetime directly. Luo Fan only needed one look to know what was going on. Sure enough, even a medium mastery of Sage to Be. The nature of the dream world was not much different from that of an ordinary person. When the dreamer was about to die in the dream, "I will wake up from this dream." Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. As the idea flashed through his mind, all the changes that were taking place around him showed how right it was. That was because it was originally suspended in midair. It was the Saint imprint that was created when the time imprint collided with the giant blood-colored hand. The Saint imprint that could change time and space and cause reincarnation in time and space to be unable to be shaken disappeared without a trace in a flash. And as it disappeared, the entire dreamscape began to rumble with a deafening rumble. Countless spiderweb-like cracks began to appear in the dream world. These fissures stretched far and wide, directly enveloping this huge world that spanned an unknown number of light-years. Even the sages high up in the sky were not aware that they were enveloped by these fissures. Then, the cracks grew larger and denser. In the end, the entire dream world completely collapsed, turning into a strange powder that was so fine that it was almost negligible. It formed an incomparably huge yet incomparably fine lump. The strange mist that did not take up any space at all wrapped around Luo Fan's body. I can rest assured now. Luo Fan let out a long sigh of relief. Although he had already expected this, even if it was him, he would not be completely sure that things would develop according to his plan. Even if it was him, he could not be completely sure that things would develop according to his plan. He had obtained too many benefits in this dreamscape. It was so much that he even felt that he owed Yan Qingqing, who had dreamt of this. Under such circumstances, if he were to defeat Yan Qingqing here, he would be killing her in the real world. Luo Fan would feel some pressure in his heart. He felt uneasy. Don't be fooled by how decisive he was in killing those projections in the past. It was as if even the Emperor of Heaven would block his path. He could destroy them without batting an eyelid. He felt that Luo Fan would be able to kill Yan Qingqing without any hesitation. In fact, the reason why he could kill those projections so decisively was because those projections were only projections. To him, they were not real existences. However, Yan Qingqing was obviously different. This dream world was between projection and reality. Moreover, Yan Qingqing was the real Yan Qingqing. She was a dream incarnation of a mid-stage quasi-sage. She was a real existence. Her life source, her will, and her thoughts were all real existences. To him, such a real existence was naturally completely different from those projected creatures. If he had to kill Yan Qingqing to pass this stage, and if he did not kill her, he would never be able to reincarnate. Naturally, Luo Fan would kill her without any hesitation. However, it was impossible for him to have a clear conscience and act as if nothing had happened. With such a mentality, the current situation was naturally the best for Luo Fan. This is the 9991st stage. Next should be the 9992nd stage. What's going on? After heaving a sigh of relief, Luo Fan became even more curious. He began to guess what the next stage would be like. The surrounding space-time mist of the dream world began to dissipate gradually. Once again, an empty void appeared in front of Luo Fan. This void was exactly the same as the one he saw after passing the 999th stage. Clearly, this wasn't the 9992nd stage, but the stage before that. The void in front of him was a void, as if there were no rules or principles at all. In the face of such nothingness, Luo Fan's eyes revealed an even stronger look of expectation. At this moment, a gentle voice reverberated in Luo Fan's ears. Along with this voice, the surrounding light and shadow changed. An incomparably magnificent starry sky appeared from nothingness and spread out in front of him. On the surface, everything seemed to be the same as before. It was still pitch black, but on the inside, an earth-shattering change had taken place. Previously, it had been a complete void, but now it had become as pitch-black as normal space in the universe. Within it, there were all the rules, principles, vital chi, energy, and all sorts of nothingness substances. The twinkling specks of starlight in the distance indicated the huge difference between this place and the previous void. This is the 992nd stage, the dream world of the great sage-to-be. The method to pass this stage is to find the owner of the dream world and defeat him. This voice reverberated in Luo Fan's ears. This is the dream world of the great sage-to-be? This leap was too great. Don't tell me I'm going to break through to the Dao integration stage at this stage? Luo Fan was shocked. Even his expression changed. He had never expected that the 992nd stage would be the dream world of the great sage-to-be. One must know. The great sage-to-be was equivalent to the transcendent expert. Even the weakest great sage-to-be, who had just broken through to the transcendent initial stage, was equivalent to the transcendent initial stage. It was not something that any Dao integration stage expert could resist. Under such circumstances, the only way for Luo Fan to find the owner of this dream world and defeat him was to break through to the transcendent expert and break through to the Dao integration stage in this dream world. This was what he knew. How could Luo Fan's expression not change drastically? Previously, when he was at the 9991st gate, he was able to obtain such a huge improvement from the initial stage of Dao fusing to the great success stage. This was due to countless opportunities and coincidences. Moreover, it was because Yan Qingqing possessed a saint's imprint that ordinary living beings couldn't possibly possess. At this moment, he did not know who this great sage-to-be was, and it was almost impossible for him to possess the sage imprint. Even if he did, the possibility of him finding the owner was next to nothing. Under such circumstances, breaking through 2 levels in this dream world and becoming a transcendent expert was simply too difficult. It was simply an impossible task. Luo Fan's expression changed for a long time. In the end, he suppressed the displeasure in his heart. He suppressed the thought of roaring that it was impossible and started to comprehend the characteristics of this dream world. He could only suppress his displeasure. This checkpoint had already been determined, so how could the hidden powerhouse be unhappy just because of him? Why would he change the stage because of his roar? In a situation where he was in a bad mood and shouting was completely useless, Luo Fan still had the self-control to not do useless things. He opened his eyes. His great sage-to-be Dao integration stage eyesight rose to the peak. The entire starry sky started to peel off layer by layer in his eyes. The countless laws and profound mysteries hidden in the depths of the laws gradually emerged in his eyes. Soon, Luo Fan felt that he had a rather deep understanding of this dream world. This world was also a world between projection and reality. The great Dao and other things in this world were completely different from what Luo Fan had seen in the past. It was also completely different from Yan Qingqing's dream world that he had just experienced. The stability of space and time in this world was many times stronger than that of the Earth universe. It was even much stronger than that of the untainted land. According to Luo Fan's calculations, it was not far from the great Tianyuan world. The void was filled with all kinds of essence qi. Its density was only about 10 times stronger than that of the real Earth universe. However, its quality was far superior to that of the Earth universe. There was an extremely large amount of innate essence qi. There was also a higher level of essence qi that was not chaotic essence qi. The hidden Great Dao had a specific form that Luo Fan had never seen before. It was a divine dragon, a seemingly infinitely huge and yet infinitely small 9-clawed divine dragon. The divine dragon was attached to countless spacetimes, which contained countless vital auras. These auras were at least at the sage-to-be realm. Among them, there were even 5 powerful auras that made Luo Fan's heart tremble and his body and mind tightly locked. As soon as he sensed these auras, Luo Fan's heart trembled and he quickly withdrew his gaze. There are actually so many experts. Those 5 auras might be the sage in the dream world of the great accomplishment sage-to-be. However, this person shouldn't have a deep understanding of the saint. At least, he hasn't seen the saint's imprint like Yan Qingqing. Otherwise, the saint's performance wouldn't be like this. Through what he saw just now, Luo Fan had already made some important judgments in his heart. The sage was a powerful existence that Luo Fan could not even imagine. This kind of existence was omniscient and omnipotent. It was impossible for its aura to be emitted unreservedly at any time. It was also impossible for its aura to be millions and millions of times stronger than a great accomplishment sage to be. Instead, it should possess even more unfathomable profundities and mystical characteristics. Of course, that was all Luo Fan knew about the sage. It was impossible for him to describe the profundities and characteristics of the sage's aura. He did not need to explain it clearly as long as the aura was something that he could understand, something that could be measured. Then, this aura was definitely not the true aura of a sage, that's better. After sensing the aura emitted by the sage in the dream world, Luo Fan finally gained some confidence. Without much understanding of the sage's Tao, there was a limit to how strong this great accomplishment sage to be was. Although the chances of him defeating the sage with his cultivation that had yet to reach the transcendent realm was still slim, it was no longer as impossible as before. With that thought in mind, he turned into a rainbow and shot towards the nearest lifeform. The stability of the space in this dream world was comparable to that of the great heaven primordial world. The amount of energy needed to directly shift a distance that was calculated in light years was extremely shocking. It was something that even Luo Fan was unwilling to bear directly. Moreover, no matter how much time passed in this dream world, it was only equivalent to a nap of a great accomplishment sage to be. There was no rush in terms of time. That was why Luo Fan chose to turn into a rainbow. Although it was much slower than shifting through the void, it was still a relatively fast way to travel. That life form was more than 30 light years away from where Luo Fan was. This was considered close in the entire cosmos. However, Luo Fan would need several months to reach there in his rainbow form. Thus, Luo Fan did not waste any time along the way. Instead, he started to reconstruct the time imprint in his mind. He could already see from Yan Qingqing's dream world just how terrifying was the profundity of the tide of the times. Luo Fan had to face a great accomplishment sage to be in this stage. This was an existence that was much stronger than him and was fundamentally different from him. He naturally could not let the power go to waste. He had to think of a way to fully unleash its power. The time imprint was formed by the combination of dozens of powers. It was only able to unleash a little of the power of the time imprint that he had comprehended. In order to truly unleash its full power, or even unleash it beyond normal limits, it was clearly impossible to use such a crude and simple method and use so little power. In Luo Fan's mind, the endless power of the time imprint kept appearing, combining, changing, and disappearing. Countless combinations of powers kept appearing in his mind. These combinations were all beneficial to unleashing the power of the time imprint. Each of them was even more powerful than the time imprint that he had unleashed before. They did not take the form of a seal. Instead, they came in all shapes and sizes. There were sabers, spears, swords, halberds, axes, hooks, forks, and many more. However, none of them could meet Luo Fan's requirements. None of them could unleash the full power of the time imprint. This naturally meant that these were not the final result. This meant that Luo Fan had to continue searching. Time passed quickly. After a few months, Luo Fan arrived outside the galaxy of the planet with life. He was about to enter the galaxy and approach the planet with life. At this moment, the rainbow that Luo Fan had transformed into shook slightly and disappeared without a trace. His figure reappeared in the void at this moment. At the same time, an indescribable aura was released from his body. The entire galaxy was completely shrouded in this powerful aura at this moment. No matter what the living beings in the galaxy were doing, they all froze in an instant. The powerful ones could still raise their heads to look at the source of the aura in the sky, but the weak ones just stood there in a daze. Their minds went blank, and they completely lost all perception of the outside world. This aura was extremely profound and indescribably wondrous. There was no need to mention how powerful it was. However, what was even more mysterious was the special characteristic of the aura. This special characteristic was that the aura seemed to be irresistible. All the fluctuations and changes of this aura seemed to be destined by the heavens. It was unshakable, unchangeable, undistorted, and untransferable. It was as if going against this aura would be a disgraceful act. Along with this aura, a faint bright red light appeared out of thin air around Luo Fan's body. It surrounded him and quickly infected the aura he emitted. In the end, all of his aura was dyed a faint bright red. After this bright red light appeared, the galaxy seemed to be completely separated from the dream world. It formed an independent region and an independent spacetime. The interior of the galaxy that was shrouded by this aura was completely cut off from the outside world. All means of communication with the outside world were completely cut off in an instant. The galaxy had completely lost contact with the outside world. The entire dream world had also completely lost contact with the interior of the galaxy. Chapter 929. All sorts of tangible and intangible senses spread towards this place. They scanned the star system up and down, front and back, left and right countless times. Unfortunately, this star system was already completely enveloped by the mysterious aura that Luo Fan emitted. It existed in the form of an independent spacetime. Therefore, even if the owner of these auras was extremely powerful and possessed unfathomable divine abilities, no matter how they tried to sense it, they could not penetrate the range of the aura. They could not sense the stellar system that was originally extremely conspicuous. They could only sense that the location where the stellar system was originally located had now become a strange, empty space. It was as if there had been no physical existence in it since ancient times. As they sensed this, there was an obvious tremor in the auras. For a moment, an inexplicable chaos was produced among the auras. Then, the senses kept retracting, and the auras began to be mobilized and changed. Luo Fan naturally did not expect that his actions would cause such a consequence. At this moment, his mind was filled with a boundless bright red light. This bright red light was extremely dazzling, and it even felt as if it had condensed into a substance. All of the bright red light came from nothing else. Instead, it was a combination of hundreds of thousands of different powers that existed in his mind in an extremely exquisite and mysterious way. It was a combination of powers that looked like a flag. The flag floated in the center of his mind, and his entire mind was filled with a boundless bright red light. It fluctuated with every fluctuation of the flag, and any slight change of the flag would be clearly displayed in the boundless red light. This bright red light was so mysterious that it even penetrated his mind and directly stimulated his aura, causing it to overflow uncontrollably and directly envelop the entire star system. And it was precisely because it was stimulated by this bright red light that the aura had a faint bright red color. I finally succeeded. Luo Fan let out a long breath. His heart was filled with joy. With a thought, millions of different powers rushed out of the acupoints all over his body and began to condense on top of his head. Although each of these powers was extremely weak, each of them was extremely tough and condensed. The entire process of condensing and outlining revealed its profoundness. It was so deep that it was unimaginable. Even the trajectory of every single one of them. All of them were capable of allowing connate golden immortals to comprehend some sort of supreme principle and attain a breakthrough in their cultivation. This power eventually condensed into a bright red flag that was 16 feet long and 10 feet wide. There was only a bright red color on the flag. There were no other images, but any living being who saw this flag would feel that it contained everything, including all matter and principles in the universe. They could be easily found. As soon as this flag appeared, the aura around Luo Fan retracted. Originally, it had enveloped the entire galaxy, but now it was completely contained within his body. His entire person floated in the void, just like an ordinary person. The bright red flag above his head began to emit countless rays of bright red light. This light didn't seem to have any substance, but it had countless inconceivable properties. The entire galaxy was instantly shrouded in this light, and the complete independence of the galaxy was instantly enhanced by more than 100 times. A kind of self-contained space-time, self-contained universe filled the entire star system. Inexplicable changes appeared on every planet within the entire galaxy. On a planet that had life, it had undergone an earth-shattering change. Originally, this planet of life was similar to the other planets of life in Dream World. It was an existence that existed between projection and reality. Everything it looked like was illusory and unreal. However, at this moment, after being enveloped by this bright red light, all living beings on this planet seemed to have instantly come to life. The true properties contained within were suddenly enhanced by several times. The feeling of illusory and unreality. It was also instantly weakened to the point where it was almost undetectable. This was very obvious. All living beings on this planet were bestowed with more true properties due to the bright red light's illumination. They became more real than the entire dreamscape outside, and even more so than the saints in the unseen world. After the bright red flag appeared, Luo Fan suddenly felt as if he had become an unstoppable, unshakable, and indestructible vast existence. His every thought seemed to be able to reverse life and death and change fate. With a slight thought, the void in front of him suddenly shook, and a small world appeared out of thin air. This world was only the size of a palm, but it was all-encompassing. It had almost everything that a normal world would have. There were even countless living beings diligently seeking and cultivating within it. Moreover, the truth contained within this world was even more than the state of this galaxy after Luo Fan had added a lot of truth to it. It was even more real than the entire dreamscape. It's a pity that I didn't meet Yan Qingqing now. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to fight such a bitter battle. I only need to take out this era's flag, and I can easily obtain victory. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. At this moment, he felt that he was more than 100 times stronger than when he first met Yan Qingqing. The feeling of having the surrounding space-time under his control filled him with boundless confidence. Suddenly, Luo Fan raised his eyebrows. He raised his hand and slapped, and the small world in front of him was directly slapped into nothingness. With a shake, it disappeared without a trace. The era's flag on top of his head also instantly drilled into the top of his head. It didn't disperse, and directly floated in his sea of consciousness. This was only a thought clone. Luo Fan didn't specially cultivate the sea of consciousness. However, because of the continuous improvement of his cultivation realm, the sea of consciousness also rose with the tide. At this moment, it had already turned into a boundless and strange universe. In this universe there were countless stars and planets. Everything in this universe was formed by the various powers that Luo Fan had comprehended according to a special method. The whole universe was a universe of power. It was the complete embodiment of the worldview that Luo Fan had inherited from Great Strength Lord. Of course, because Luo Fan hadn't truly comprehended all the powers that formed the complete universe, this strange power might look perfect on the surface, but in reality, there were still many flaws. There were many flaws, and there were countless places that could be improved. If this wasn't the world in his sea of consciousness, but a real world that existed in the outside world, such an imperfect world would have long collapsed and turned into dust. The moment the bright red flag that Luo Fan had condensed entered the sea of consciousness, this strange universe suddenly shook. Then, the endless scattered light that the flag emitted filled the whole strange universe. It dyed the whole strange universe a faint bright red. Under the bright red shroud, the whole universe gave off an indescribable feeling of stability. The flaws that existed before, the countless places that could be improved, seemed to have completely disappeared. The whole strange universe seemed so perfect, so complete. This was the degree of perfection of the real universe. It seemed to be incomparable to this strange universe. Seeing this change, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile faintly. Sure enough, I can use this era's flag to suppress the sea of consciousness. With that thought, his figure flashed, and he arrived at a certain mountain on the surface of the planet with life. After condensing the bright red flag, the power of his magic had greatly increased. Unknowingly, he could already easily move through the void. The bright red flag formed by hundreds of thousands of powers was the combination of powers that Luo Fan had worked hard to deduce over the past few months. It was the combination of powers that could best unleash the mysteries of the era's trend. This combination of powers was complicated and exquisite. It was stronger than any combination of powers that Luo Fan had deduced before. The amount of energy Luo Fan had expended was also more than any combination of powers he had deduced before. And the final result was also better than any combination of powers he had deduced before. For example, other combinations of powers couldn't be like the bright red flag that he had condensed at this time. It could enter his sea of consciousness and suppress his sea of consciousness like a magic treasure. It also couldn't greatly enhance the power of his magic when he wasn't using it, allowing him to easily do things that he couldn't do before. It's a pity. The profound mysteries of the tide of the times that I have comprehended are still too little. If I could have more, the power of the banner of the times would have been even stronger. Luo Fan was still somewhat unsatisfied at this time. He couldn't be blamed for being greedy. It was just that the pressure he was facing right now was too great. The power of a great success quasi-sage was already something that he couldn't compare to. Not to mention, in this dreamscape world, who knew how powerful a great completion quasi-sage would be? With the era's flag that he had condensed at this moment, which could unleash the full power of the mysteries of the era's trend, Luo Fan was confident that he could instantly kill a middle success quasi-sage. However, he wasn't so confident about dealing with a great success quasi-sage. Under such circumstances, he was naturally eager to obtain even more powerful god arts and unleash even more shocking power. At this moment, Luo Fan raised his head and looked at the sky. His gaze pierced through the barrier of the atmosphere and penetrated the deep void. He saw thousands of figures rushing into this star system, rushing towards the only habitable planet in this star system. These figures didn't belong to the same faction. This could be seen from the way they advanced and the way their auras clashed with each other. It's good that they're here. I'll treat this planet with life as my stage, Luo Fan muttered with a smile as he looked at the approaching figures. He had sensed the arrival of these auras when he was in the void, so he raised his eyebrows and kept the era's flag in his sea of consciousness. Otherwise, he would have wanted to test out the power of this era's flag and study its wondrous uses. The reason why Luo Fan had produced all kinds of strange phenomena before, where his aura had stimulated and enveloped the entire galaxy, making the entire galaxy seem independent and completely cut off from all contact with the outside world, was because at that time, the combination of power of the flag had finally taken shape, making him unable to control the formation of his own body. Before that, he didn't expect such a shocking phenomenon to appear at all. He also didn't know that this phenomenon would trigger a reaction from the many experts hidden in the endless space-time. Because of this, he immediately began to test the power of the era's flag after he woke up, causing an even greater and more shocking phenomenon to appear. However, when he sensed that thousands of figures were heading towards this place, no matter how ignorant he was, he understood the reason behind it. He understood why such an unusual change had occurred. For a moment, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, he also felt that this was good. After all, if he was asked to wander around the vast dream world and search for various clues to increase the power of his magic, he could do it. However, it was too troublesome. He didn't know when he would be able to complete it. Seriously speaking, it was a good thing that he was able to attract those hidden experts. He only needed to stay on this planet to complete the goal that he previously needed to travel through the entire dream world to achieve. After sighing with emotion, Luo Fan turned around. He arrived at a large city on this planet. The civilization of this planet was a cultivation civilization. However, this kind of cultivation was different from ordinary cultivation civilizations. This cultivation civilization was a civilization of talismans. This civilization cultivated soul spirit. It was a civilization of cultivation that used talismans to stimulate the cultivation civilization. The strongest experts in this cultivation civilization. They could even reach the level of quasi-saints. Although they had only just reached the level of quasi-saints, it was still an incredible achievement. However, it was still an inconceivable achievement. It could be considered a rather complete cultivation civilization. Luo Fan came to this large city to get an impeccable identity before those experts landed on this planet. Among the thousands of experts, the weakest was at the level of quasi-saints. However, the strongest was only at the intermediate level of quasi-saint. Moreover, none of them was at the peak of the intermediate level. For Luo Fan, they could be killed with a single slap. However, Luo Fan obviously couldn't kill them with a single slap. After all, these living beings were just subordinates sent by the experts hidden in various spacetime. Before getting to the bottom of the situation and finding the advanced quasi-saint, how could Luo Fan deal with them for a moment of pleasure? To obtain a legal identity on a planet where the strongest expert was only at the level of quasi-saints, a perfect and unquestionable identity was naturally a trivial matter for Luo Fan. After strolling around the various departments of this large city, Luo Fan had already solved the problem of his identity. At this moment, he was a cultivator born and raised on this planet. His cultivation had already been compressed to a realm that wasn't too high nor too low, and it was equivalent to a golden immortal realm cultivator. The strongest amongst the few thousand cultivators that were rushing over were weaker than him, so it was naturally impossible for any of them to see through his true strength. If you guys were already here, I definitely wouldn't be able to hide this from you. However, although you guys are only a few breaths slower, you've already lost the possibility of discovering anything suspicious. Luo Fan thought as a faint smile appeared on his face. He was currently sitting cross-legged on a tall building. He was wearing clothes that matched the style of this planet. His figure and face were no different from the ordinary people on this planet. If they didn't know beforehand, no one would be able to tell that he was an outsider. However, this advanced quasi-saint doesn't look as idealistic as Yan Qingqing. Then, Luo Fan started to think about the style of the owner of this dreamland. From the various signs on this planet, Luo Fan had already figured out the state of the entire dreamland. The entire dreamland was not like Yan Qingqing's dreamland, which was filled with beings above the grand Luo innate realm. Although this dreamland was different from the real Earth, it was only a few levels higher in terms of life level. There were also strong and weak beings. Even the weakest creatures were only a few times stronger than the ordinary mortals of the Earth universe. The vital planet that Luo Fan was currently on was extremely huge. According to his conjecture, the diameter of the Earth that Luo Fan was born on in his previous life was only about 1/10,000th of this planet. Even though Luo Fan was standing on the highest floor of this city, the entire land was still flat. He couldn't see any curves at all. The intelligent beings on the entire planet were still humans with born Taoism aptitude. This should be a given. Those who could cultivate to the great accomplishment of sage to be, no matter what their original bodies were, must have refined their bodies and turned them into born Taoism aptitude. Only in this way could they cultivate to such a high realm. Since he himself was already an innate Taoism aptitude, the intelligent beings in this dreamland that he loved could only be those with innate Taoism aptitude. There were trillions of people on this planet, among which many other kinds of life existed, forming an incomparably rich and perfect ecosystem. At this moment, the entire planet was in an uproar. Almost everyone was discussing the various changes in the sky just now. Why did they feel as if they had lost a part of their memories? The experts on this planet were even more terrified. They discussed with each other intensely, trying to find out the truth of the matter. Although they could sense more than ordinary beings, they couldn't see Luo Fan, who was at the edge of the galaxy. Naturally, they couldn't know what was going on.